Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, Sound.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, members. We're now in public session, and just to confirm that the meeting is being broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings. Just want to welcome anybody watching online today. Just to remind you to mute your mobile phones and that no recording nor photography of the meeting is allowed. So if members are content, we'll proceed with the agenda. So we don't have any apologies, although we think that was Sinead possibly?
I haven't heard from Sinead.
Haven't heard from Sinead. Sinead's not joined us yet. Claire's running late and Philip is coming. He was here. He's going to join us shortly. Okay, members, any declarations of interest to declare in relation to this meeting? Okay,
yes, Chair.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a family member who works within the Victims Payment Scheme. So.
Okay, thank you. That's noted. Okay, Chairperson's business 3.1, the Katy Trust, Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. I'm going to refer you to page 3 of the table pack. Just to advise that I received correspondence from the Katy Trust requesting a meeting to discuss the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy and the wider challenges surrounding long-term sustainable funding and delivery across the sector. So just going to seek your agreement to ask the committee team to arrange an informal meeting between representatives of this organisation and the Deputy Chair myself in the first instance, with a view possibly of taking it forward from there. Agreed? Okay, so the ICR report, the May review report, so I'm going to refer you to pages 11 to 12 of the table pack. And just to advise that the May review of the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery was commissioned following concerns about its corporate effectiveness and culture. So just to advise that the review was carried out by the former Permanent Secretary Peter May, and he identified that the organisation has been facing a number of problems linked to internal governance and culture at senior levels. So I wonder if anybody has any comments on that before I go forward. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Chair, obviously you seen the email that I had sent last night just looking to raise this. I've taken a quick read over the report itself, and some of the shortcomings are absolutely disastrous in my opinion. Now there's quite a few recommendations coming out of the report itself. I suppose from my point of view I have two key concerns. First concern is confidence, and I know a number of victims and survivors going into the process at the start of ICR confidence was at a low ebb itself. And I suppose the second issue that I can foresee is credibility with this organisation. In my opinion, Chair, their credibility is in absolute tatters. And on that basis, could we write to Declan Morgan and ask him to come in and brief us to maybe take some questions on this, as well as the NIO, Chair? I know the Secretary of State released a statement yesterday, but if we could maybe put or pose some questions to NIO in terms of what steps they're going to take to ensure that some of these concerns are addressed.
Okay, I'll take that as a suggestion in case anybody else wants to comment at this stage. No. Okay, no, I fully agree with you, Anya, in terms of inviting. As you are aware, the sponsoring body is the NIO as opposed to any of the government departments here in Northern Ireland, so they've graciously come before us twice, but they can refuse that. But let's invite them. I think that possibly off the back of that, we could then take those issues and then write to the NIO, or do you think that we should write at the same time?
I think we should write at the same time. In terms of NIO, look, they most likely will come back with a response. We can deal with that kind of in parallel. But obviously from our remit at TO, I'm looking through this through the lens of victims and survivors and the concerns that they will have, no doubt, off the back of this report.
Okay, are we agreed with Anya's suggestion?
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so 3.3, Quality Commission news release and response to correspondence. I'm going to refer you to page 23 of the pack and to pages 13 to 14 of the table pack. So just to remind, at last week's meeting, the committee was advised that the Supreme Court's judgment in the Dillon case was due to be handed down on Thursday, the 6th of May 2026. This judgment determined a number of questions in relation to Article 2 of the Windsor Framework and the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act of 2023. So just to advise that the Equality Commission has now responded to the committee's correspondence on the ruling, indicating that it would welcome the opportunity to provide evidence to the committee on this following consideration of the High Court meeting or appointment scheduled for the 1st of June 2026. A provisional date of Wednesday the 24th of June 2026 has been agreed with the Equality Commission for this committee evidence session. So any comments before we... Okay, please.
Sorry, Chairperson. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Chairperson. Because this matters before the courts, it means it's sub judice. So, regrettably, members, this is not a good time to comment. There'll be ample opportunity on the 24th of June, but it is before the courts. Standing orders are really clear. Okay. So members are advised to say nothing further. I know. No, that's okay. The brief is wrong. The brief is wrong.
That's okay. So I think if we are content, then thank you very much for the interjection there. So if we're content to agree to formally invite the Equality Commission before us on Wednesday, 24th of June, are we content with that?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay.
So just for clarity, on the 24th of June, will we be faced with the same problem?
Well, hopefully everything will be done and dusted. My expectation, hope is, I don't know, but I hope that it will be done by the 24th of June, so we will not have this impediment and you'll be able to ask whatever questions you want. Otherwise, there would be little point, the member would agree, in bringing them along. So that would be the expectation. So 24th is predicated then on this being done, the courts having done their work, given their opinion, and there's no question of sub judice, then off we can go and ask whatever questions are required.
Okay, moving on then. Draft minutes, members. Just going to inform you that these are found on pages 7 to 21 of your pack for our meeting held on the 6th of May, and on pages 6 to 9 of the table pack for our meeting of the 12th of May. So I'm just going to ask, are you content that these minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of both these meetings?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Just out of that, can I, under matters arising, raise the Irish Language Commissioner? Just on the back of
We're
minutes.
going to be dealing with that in terms of a closed session later on, so we'll get to it then, okay?
We not do it as matters arising?
No.
Why is that?
Because we're going to deal it. We have a specific item later on that we're going to deal with it then.
Why in closed session?
Well, we are going to deal with it in closed session, and then we can speak to it after we come out of closed session back into a public session. Okay? Okay, so moving on then, members, matters arising, 5.1, politics and action. So the Ballycastle Schools report, I'm going to refer you to pages 24 to 35. So just a reminder, at the meeting on Wednesday, 29th of April, Timothy updated the committee on a recent event in which he participated with other North Antrim MLAs with politics in action and year 14 students from his constituency. So just to advise that a copy of the report from this event is included in your packs. Politics in Action has highlighted that the issue of ending violence against women and girls has come up a number of times throughout its current programme, and I'm just going to seek your agreement to forward a copy of the report to the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls officials in that directorate in the Executive Office, and also send a copy to the Committee for Education. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay.
Chair, could I just add one issue to that?
Yes.
So as soon as we finish our, we are finished our committee inquiry into gaps in equality, can we maybe perhaps look at violence against women and girls as the next one? We had it down in our strategic, and if we are, that's exactly the type of group I'd like to hear from.
Yeah. Okay. No, totally.
Thank you.
I think we're going to get under correspondence. I think we're going to discuss the issue of the race relations order, so we can maybe pick it up again then.
Okay.
Under
Right, no worries.
Okay, so item 6, the oral briefing. Members, we're going to move on now. The Victims Payment Board to talk about the Victims Payment Scheme. So I'm going to seek your agreement for Hansard to record the oral evidence session. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to refer you to pages 37 to 39 of the pack for the clerk's brief, and pages 40 to 44 of the pack for a copy of the written brief. And just while we're waiting to our guests to come into the room, I have to say, Hansard, the representative from Hansard, we had our meeting last year, and I found it so helpful to read what we said last year in preparation for this meeting. So your work is valued. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
Right,
Good afternoon. So, members, welcome to the meeting. We've got Justice McAlinden, who's the board president of the Victims Payment Board, with Paul Bulick, who is the board secretary, and Anthony Bowman, who is the head of business transformation. So, thank you so much for coming back to committee. I think it's a year since you were here last, and so we're really looking forward to engaging with you today. So, thanks for your submission in advance, but I'd just like to welcome you to make some opening remarks. Thank you.
Okay, I'll make the opening remarks.
Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much. I think it's just a year to the day, more or less, that we were here. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the invite for us to come here today and provide an update to the committee. As you know, the scheme opened on the 31st of August 21, and it's scheduled to close on the 30th of August this year, 26. Just to remind you, the key purpose of the scheme was to provide those living with a permanent disablement caused by injury through no fault of their own in a troubles-related incident with a payment and acknowledgement of the acute harm which they have suffered, and to provide a measure of recognition of the implications of living with a disablement caused by a serious troubles-related incident and the associated impact that has on carers, who are often family members, as well as the recognition in many cases of coping with that permanent disablement throughout their life. Just really an update on the current position of the scheme. At present, we have 72 judicially appointed board members, and that's a kind of equal mix of legal, medical and lay experienced members. The independence of the board is essential and crucial, and it provides assurance to victims around the decisions on the entitlement to payments under the scheme. Just as of this week, around £139 million has been paid to eligible applicants since the scheme opened. We have received just over 13,223 applications to the scheme, with approximately 950 of these being received from outside of NI. There's been about 6,000 cases listed for consideration by a panel to go in front of a panel for a determination at various stages. And to date, almost 4,800, approximately 4,800 determinations have been made. Of the determinations made, around 3,000 have been determined as eligible, with the remaining 1,800 circa being determined as not eligible. The business transformation, and we have Anthony with us today who will be able to say a lot more, but I'll just give you a quick run through. Just where you'll recall that when we last briefed the committee, we had commissioned the independent review of the end-to-end processes by the ICS, and that review did identify a number of opportunities how we could streamline things and improve the experience of applicants. Since then, the business transformation team, the project team, has made strong progress. They've completed a detailed mapping of the full applicant journey, and with input from staff, board members, support groups and other stakeholders have developed a phased programme of incremental changes. These improvements are already being made across the piece to enhance both the quality of the applicant experience and overall efficiency of the scheme. The team has also been working closely with the digital provider to strengthen and enhance the functionality of the current case management system. These enhancements will provide operational resilience, speed up case handling and provide a much more robust platform for future-proofing ongoing payments and the longer-term operation of the scheme. Phased implementation of these has already begun and continues. And over the coming months, as further process improvements continue to roll out, we expect to see additional gains operationally and a more streamlined experience for the applicants. And just a couple of lines as well on communication and awareness. With the scheme due to close for applications in August this year, we have continued to work with our media partners to ensure that the messaging is pushed to as wide an audience as possible, particularly in wider GB, ROI and further afield. An awareness campaign did take place in September 25 to advertise the scheme across a wide range of stakeholders, political reps and welfare groups throughout the UK, Republic of Ireland and further afield. And more recently, from February this year, February 26, we have issued information kits and these have been prepared and distributed to a wide range of stakeholders and representatives throughout the victims' organisations and healthcare settings, church settings, etc. throughout the UK, ROI and further afield again. And we have also prepared and issued a number of press releases across constituency areas to raise awareness and encourage applications from any victims who may be eligible and to get their application in ahead of the closing date in August. So really, in concluding the opening remarks, it shouldn't be underestimated the difference that this scheme has made to victims and their families. We know it's changed their lives for the better, those who have received a payment, and provided them with much needed support and financial security. So that's really the end of our opening remarks. We're very happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, so last year, as you say, you were talking about the end-to-end review and you were talking about project manager had just been appointed. Just wonder, can you speak to how effective that possibly is you, Anthony, is it? In terms of how you've sort of implemented the recommendations, is that appropriate for you to respond, Anthony, in terms of what you've been working on in the last year?
Yes, so far we have, as was mentioned in the opening remarks, we've completed the end-to-end review of all the processes in the scheme, and we have strengthened the ICS review recommendations. So they were conducted for a fixed point in time, and as the scheme has progressed, teams were making improvements as they went on, so we had to make sure that the information we had was up to date. We have designed a programme of incremental changes so that we can implement the recommendations made by the ICS review without impacting on the business as usual activity of the scheme. The recommendations around the digital system are now progressing, and we were awaiting a contract extension negotiation with the digital supplier, and now that's been completed. That's moving forward. So we have seen some of our preliminary work around the digital system implemented, but the bulk of the work will be happening over the next year in that regard. As for the staffing and structure of the scheme, we have made our recommendations for the resourcing of the scheme in order to meet the ICS recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. So Paul, you mentioned there that over £138 million has been given out to date, and determinations have been made to just over a third of all applicants. So can you foresee or forecast now what the overall cost will be, or the overall allocation will be once the all been assessed and processed, and how does that compare with what was the original expectation or estimation of what the scheme was going to cost?
Well, at the moment, I wouldn't have the overall cost from the start of the scheme to the end of the scheme. It's very much a demand-led scheme. I can say that the number of applications we have received is broadly in line with what was forecast at the very beginning of the scheme, before the scheme opened. You know, when we had set it up as a project team to establish the board, the structures and around that, and that was the Government Actuaries Department, you know, GAD, who had been helping us forecast those. If we're looking at the just over 13,000 applications have been received, and if we're kind of profiling on the same trends, we do expect maybe a small spike before the scheme would close. You know, and I think that would be natural in any scheme as it comes to an end. But that would be broadly in line with the medium for the GAD figures at the time. There's so many variables with the cost. You know, I wouldn't be able to provide the committee with that information today. You know, we can say the total amount paid out to victims, but then there's the board costs, there's the staffing costs. There's also going to be a bit of a tail to this, you know, and Anthony can maybe speak more to this about how that tail would be influenced by the business transformation. But we closed for applications in August. You know, there could be five years of processing applications, because you'll see that most of the applications still have not been through the full process, and they have to be determined, evidence gathered, determined, and then obviously there's 12 months from our final determination on any final case to allow people to appeal, you know, under the regulations.
Okay, you just predicted my follow-up question there, but no, thank you. But that, yeah, so that'll be then almost 10 years in between getting the scheme set up right through till the very end. Then it's.
I think when this scheme was being proposed, the senior civil servants from the Executive Office, from Department of Justice, etc., asked me how long did I think, bearing in mind the statutory framework that had been proposed, how long did I think this would trundle on for? And I mean, it was quite clear in my view at that time that the conservative figure was around 10 years. And I think the likelihood is that with the management of regular payments which will be required, and also the transfer of entitlement from a beneficiary to the next of kin of the beneficiary, this scheme in some shape or form, the administration of the scheme will go on probably beyond my lifetime.
Okay, thank you for that. So the last time you were here, you were talking about being able to access GP records, and I think we had a discussion about that we all recognise the pressures within GP practices, etc. Has that process improved, or the memorandum of understanding, has that been augmented to help that information flow a bit?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Yes, we have seen an improvement in information coming through from GPs. We also have an arrangement with SPPG to gather information from secondary care.
Okay.
And that has greatly assisted, you know. So again, there's complexities, there's difficulties with evidence gathering just due to the nature of the time period we're looking at. You know, we're going back maybe 50 years in some cases, and in some cases it could 50 different incidents. You know, up to 50 different incidents. You know, it can range from one incident, two incidents, up to multiple incidents. So there is still difficulties for that, but we have noticed a marked improvement, and we would regularly meet with the GPs, the representatives. We regularly meet with SPPG. We also regularly meet with Capita, and Capita reporting that the returns from GPs has been steadily improving and increasing.
Okay, good stuff. The last one for me then. So again, during your last appearance, there was talk about possibly engaging more with people who've been through the process around sort of feeding in then to the transformation and improving sort of the processes. Has that been ongoing, or is there any feedback in terms of that piece of work?
Well, I'll maybe let Anthony say a wee bit more about the engagement through the BTP. But yes, we have reached out to the groups at various stages to see if we can get people who have been through the process to agree to maybe, even as part of our kind of press outreach and our media outreach, was to try and get some personal stories for groups from people who have been through the process. It didn't turn out as easy as we maybe thought it might have been. There was some people willing to come forward and they had stories to tell, but we'll continue with our efforts on that. And with regard to that engagement, we'll probably continue with your work as well, Anthony.
Yes, and I will say the feedback from the welfare groups has informed the work of the business transformation. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of communication with the various support groups, we do have regular meetings with the support groups. I make it my business to engage with the leaders of those support groups one-to-one, so that any issues that they are very keen to raise directly with me are raised with me. But I think that in terms of, let's say, the engagement with individuals who have gone through the process, it has to be accepted that part of the whole thing is trying to put things behind them, okay? And I don't want to put pressure on people to re-engage with the board once they see that they're through the process and they're out the other end. So it's a difficult balancing act between getting feedback from those that have been through it and, in a sense, burdening those individuals with further requests for information. So it's a balancing, and it's a difficult balancing exercise that we have to engage in.
Okay, thank you. So, Deputy Chair, please.
Thank you, and thank you very much for coming back to us today. Indeed, as the Chair said, it was very helpful just to look at some of the Hansard comments that we made last year. You've had a business transformation project in place since the last time that we commented on both systems and the organisational structure. And listening to what you're saying today and reading about it, transformation has taken place and is continuing to take place. So can we say that from this time last year there is a change? And
there definitely is a change, and I look at these things both individually and systemically, right? I look at it from the point of view of there are systemic issues and we need to have policies in place to address those systemic issues. But all the policies in the world don't make a difference unless you have the right people in place, right? So I always keep an eye on the individual type of input, right? What I can say is I'm hard to please, but I'm impressed by this guy.
Good.
His background, is in inland revenue, right? So he doesn't take any prisoners in terms of, he looks at problems, he analyses problems, and thankfully he comes up with solutions. And I have been impressed, genuinely impressed by the solutions that he's proposed.
I think it's fair to say that is very heartening by comparison to perhaps where we might have been some time ago. May I ask just around the area of the scheme coming to close in August of this year, and the real desire of yourselves and your board, and indeed all of us, to ensure that everyone who is eligible for the scheme has had an opportunity to come forward. And you undoubtedly will be redoubling your efforts in terms of advertising and communicating and working with organisations. Two things. One, do you expect a rush of applications at the coming towards the closure?
Well, I remember when the issue was whether the backdating, etc., would be extended, and one of the reasons why we expected a big rush was the deadline coming in. Obviously that was removed, and therefore we didn't we didn't receive the glut of applications that we otherwise might have expected. In terms of the closure of the scheme, there might be some form of blip, but I think really in essence the scheme is pretty widely known about, and I think that those that really have valid claims have brought those claims to the attention of the support groups or direct to the board by now.
Yes.
What we're saying, I think, is if you look at the statistics in terms of the applications coming in, they're more speculative. Okay, they're more about pushing the boundaries of the scheme to include, let's say, issues that might not previously have been considered to fall within scope, etc. So I don't think there'll be a massive blip. There could be a blip, but I think basically what we're saying is the longer this scheme remains in place, the more, let's say, imaginative applications are going to be brought to the scheme, okay? And, there must be a cut-off point between having let's say, the resourcing that's required to deal with these issues and the benefits that are really being provided to the community as a result of the processing of these schemes. I think it's the balancing exercise, and I think the balance has probably been struck in the right place by the closure of the scheme in August. Bearing in mind there is always the potential under the legislation for a late application to be considered on exceptional grounds. It isn't utterly, prevented by the closure of the scheme. What would have to be shown is that there were exceptional grounds, and I think dealing with it on a victim-centric approach, the exceptional grounds rationale would be sympathetically interpreted.
That's very useful to know. And in terms of whether there's a small increase in people coming forward, or as you suggested, perhaps slightly more speculative claims coming forward, what resources do you have in place then to counsel those individuals, to provide them with the, if you like, well, actually you're not going to succeed in this process, but we understand the trauma and the difficulties that has brought you to the point of saying, well, I think I might well be a victim, but if you're saying, well, you don't fit the scheme, how then do you work with those people? Because that in itself can be quite traumatic.
Well, again, it could be described as a bit of buck passing here, but obviously the support groups,
yes,
right, they need to be funded beyond the closure of the scheme, right? It's not about them being funded to process fresh applications to the scheme. It's about them being funded to provide support, general support for people that come to them, both in relation to this scheme and in relation to associated issues. Okay? There's also the issue of the very valuable support that Dr. Kieran Mulholland and the Trauma Network has basically engaged in. That is one of the, to my mind, one of the wins of this whole process has been the development of that support mechanism within our scheme, but that will have to survive, I think, in one shape or form beyond the closure of the scheme, so that people who are, genuinely have developed trauma, whether it falls within the scheme or not, you still have a duty of care towards those individuals. We as a society still have a duty of care to those individuals, and it's how we can build on the work that has been carried out by this scheme to maintain the level of support that's been provided both by the support groups and by Kieran Mulholland and others to ensure that those in need receive the help for the trauma that they have obviously suffered, whether it falls within the scheme or not, or whether the scheme is closed or not.
And as the scheme draws to a close, then presumably those comments and areas and issues like that you will raise with the appropriate.
We have asked. I mean, I've asked for a meeting with the Secretary of State.
Okay.
I haven't got a response. Okay, but I have asked, and if I get a chance, I'm never shy when I get a chance of basically.
That's been very helpful.
Thank you, Carol, please.
Thank you very much for coming back again. Anthony, you're described almost as a tax collector, just to remind you, Jesus love. tax collectors as well. So, but it's good to see that the end-to-end independent review has been done, and you're now sitting as a result of it. So the 3 areas that were identified were process, digital systems, and organisational structure. And again, we're all very sensitive when we're talking about process. We're talking about people at their most vulnerable applying for support. So how has this end-to-end review helped people not only apply, but the trauma that they go through as a process of the application, and even during the whole application process? How has that been made better for people who are really vulnerable?
Take it on.
I think the biggest change that's been implemented to benefit applicants at the minute has been the adoption of eligibility determinations before the medical assessments take place, which means that if people are ineligible on non-medical grounds, they're not having to go through a medical assessment with capita, when ultimately would have been unfruitful anyway. Part of our ongoing work then is to expand that. So at the minute it's quite a small scope that encompasses.
And can I interrupt you? Sorry. Medical grounds, is that physical rather than psychological?
No. Non-medical grounds is what's in the legislation. That is either it meets the requirements of troubles-related incident, there's presence, immediate aftermath, and the medical grounds is both physical and psychological.
Okay, sorry.
So, yes, the idea is that we're going to expand that so that we essentially eliminate unnecessary medical assessments as much as possible. And the second kind of thread that directly impacts applicants is going to be the speed of determination. So we're looking at a substantial increase in the rate of determinations. So we have both determinations happening at an earlier point and the overall rate of determinations increasing. So that should significantly reduce the uncertainty in the period that applicants are involved.
Okay, is there an appeal mechanism at that stage?
Yes, they still have the same right of appeal that they have to the full determination.
Okay,
yeah.
So I'll come back to that. So in terms of Justice Michael Linden, your statement that the need for support will go beyond your lifetime. So we're really talking about the next generation.
I think so.
Aye.
And just going back to what Anthony said about the journey through the process. We have looked at this. We've had 5 years to sort of look at this, and over that 5 years, it has been a learning process. Okay, and I hope that we have been open to learning. And the one thing that really did strike us was that there are a number of cases where individuals have gone right through. They've basically put in their forms. They've been assessed by capita. The assessment by capita has been, intrusive in the sense that it's asking them to revisit horrors that they lived through many, many years ago, and then they go to a panel, and then the panel basically decides, well, yes, we appreciate you went through this, yes, you suffered all this trauma, but we don't think this is a troubles-related incident, or there's some other reason why you can't get paid, such as your previous involvement or something like that, right? So what we've tried to do now is make sure that all the issues that could, let's say, be relevant to whether a person is entitled or not, those issues are determined or basically clarified, precisely clarified, before the person has to go through this medical assessment. And we think that will reduce the amount of potential for trauma. The other thing is, the board, 72 members, there's risk committees, there's business committees. There are a number of subcommittees of the board that look after various aspects of the management of an organisation of that size, right? What I've basically said is, look, we're in our last period of this scheme being opened. Beyond that, we need to try and make sure that applications are dealt with as quickly as possible, because delay is an enemy of healing. Delay gives the potential to prolong trauma. So what I've basically said is, look, we've got our structures in place now. We've got Anthony in place now. He's going to look after, the management of this structure here. Let's close down these committees. Let's minimise the work that's done by these committees, by the various board members, and transfer the availability of those board members. Let's say less time on committees, more time hearing cases, right? So we are going to see, I think, a dramatic increase in the number of cases being put through each month, and that will shorten the time span between somebody putting in an application and somebody getting a determination. So we are constantly reviewing with a view to minimising trauma, with a view to shortening the time scale, with a view to promoting healing if we can.
So my final question is in two parts. To go back to your original comment about, the need for support will go beyond this scheme, and then the need to ensure that there's a positive outcome, even though it will be part of healing, but it won't be a full healing process. Yeah. What would you recommend would happen around that support to the groups who are providing the much needed support? That's the first part. And then the second part is, I'm actually content that the governance seems to be gripped with a focus more on the outcome for people rather than the process that people have to go through, because it was traumatic and it is traumatic. Yeah. Well, so how's that going to be continued beyond August this year?
Well, first of all, with the closure date, that just stops the applications coming in, apart from the exceptional ones. But that doesn't stop the work of the board. The work of the board will be focused then on determining and speedily determining the applications that are in place, okay, to make sure that within a reasonable timescale, and when I say a reasonable timescale, the current estimates would see continued determinations taking place for 4 or 5 years, okay, and then appeals stretching it out a bit more. So, in essence, to try to ensure that trauma is minimised, we will try to deliver decisions as quickly as possible to truncate the time interval between the close of the scheme and all the determinations been made. But we recognise, and I will say to whoever holds the purse strings, and I think we know who holds the purse strings or who makes the decisions, I will say that in my experience over the past 5 years, the work of the support groups in this area has been absolutely vital, all of them, okay? They have, in essence, their own constituencies. They have people who will come to them in preference to other groups. But what has happened is that those support groups have made a genuine difference in terms of helping the applicants process their applications, but also in helping the applicants deal with the issues that they have presented with. So I think the role of the support groups is vital, and the funding of the support groups beyond the closure date is vital.
Not you, Carol. Yeah. Philip, please.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, thank you very much. I wasn't a member of the committee when you previously appeared, so I just read your evidence session from the last time you appeared, so I was just wondering if I could unpack some of that, Mr. Justice McAlinden. In your comments previously to the Deputy Chair, you had indicated that Westminster had taken up the baton and in essence imposed a scheme that no one was happy with.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you could unpack that for me, sir.
Well, no, I mean, having been in this from the very start, I was asked to be the first president because Declan Morgan assigned me to deal with the judicial review, which was why the scheme was not being implemented, why the scheme was not being funded. And so I dealt with the judicial review, made a decision which then went to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal backed me up, but actually went further than that, okay? So in essence, this scheme is a scheme that is devised by Northern Ireland Office, Secretary of State, because the local executive did not see it within their capabilities to agree a scheme which suited everybody. Okay, in terms of the definition of victimhood, okay, and in terms of the definition of who was entitled to that payment under the scheme. So Secretary of State has imposed a scheme which we as a board, myself as a judge...
But the Secretary of State didn't impose a scheme. Parliament passed a scheme.
Yes, right. Parliament passed a scheme, but it was devised by the Northern Ireland Office, devised by the Secretary of State. It went through the UK Parliament, but it did not receive, let's say, unanimous support within this jurisdiction where it's operating. Okay?
It wasn't imposed, it was passed by the Sovereign Parliament of...
Well, now, if you want to get into constitutional law, we'll have a constitutional law argument.
I want to get...
But what I'm telling you is,
you don't need to tell me
it was imposed.
Gentlemen, please.
Yeah, if I could just finish.
It was imposed.
It wasn't imposed, it was passed by Parliament, that's a fact,
Right.
sir.
Well...
Okay. Anything
If
else?
I could just then read the rest of your comments. So then you went on to say that the Executive and Assembly could deal with this issue if they could agree, if they could bring their heads together, they could reconstruct the scheme to make sure that everyone who was injured was included.
Well, in terms of the agreement that would be needed, it would have to be a redefinition of the concept of victimhood, okay? Now, that is a politically sensitive issue. That's not for me to comment on. That's for the Executive, the Assembly to agree. The one issue that I think is crying out for improvement here is the inclusion of the bereaved within some form of scheme. The present scheme does not include the bereaved, okay?
Your comments didn't say bereaved, with all due respect. Your comments said reconstruct the scheme to make sure that everyone who was injured was included.
Right. Well, what that means is that if you're going to improve the scheme so that it has universal support within Northern Ireland, one would have to change the idea, the concept of victimhood. Okay? Now, is that possible? That's not up for me to say whether it is or not, but if you wanted it to appeal and to meet, let's say, the desires of all the population in Northern Ireland, that would require a redefinition of victimhood, okay? It would, in essence, mean that the issue of what you were doing at the time that you were injured, etc., would all have to be looked at. Are people who are, let's say, injured when they are engaging in certain activities, are they still victims of the troubles that are entitled to payment? That would be an issue for the Executive, an issue for the Assembly. It's not an issue for me, but what I did recognise and what I still recognise and what I'm adamant about is that the definition of victimhood within the legislation has not attracted universal support within our society, and I have to operate a scheme knowing that that is one of the limitations of the scheme.
But your remarks didn't preface that. Your remarks said to change the scheme to make sure that everyone who was injured was included. So is it...
I'm not advocating a change in the scheme. You weren't here. I was here, and I know what I was...
You seem to be getting very angry, but I'm just reading back to your
Please
words.
be respectful.
I am, but I'm reading
No, you're
back...
not actually.
Pardon?
You're not being respectful.
I'm reading back to your words.
Yes,
Steve.
well, look, what I was intent on saying, and what I mean by those comments is simply this, that I've had a difficult enough 5-year time, okay? Engaging in this scheme, trying to run this scheme, as well as running my job as a High Court judge, okay? I'm doing this entirely on a voluntary basis without 1 cent of payment, okay? Because I was asked to do it by the Lord Chief Justice, or former Lord Chief Justice, right? And I do my best to ensure that that scheme is operated in accordance with the legislative provisions that I have. That's my duty as a judge. But I do operate within the real world, and I know that this scheme and the definition of victimhood is something that is divisive in our society. Okay,
and as a victim myself, who
I know
lost a
you
family
are.
member to
I know your
terrorists.
brother was. Yes.
Yeah, so I understand the work
Yeah.
that you've done, but
But
I just want to
what-
put on the record that the remarks that you made the last time, when you misspoke when you said that everyone,
No, I didn't misspeak.
everyone who was injured was included. My party's position will remain: if you blew yourself up, sir, you did not injure yourself and be entitled to receive
Did I
compensation.
say that I
Well, I
had?
tried to quote back your words when you said reconstruct the scheme to make sure that everyone who was injured was included.
I said that if we had a scheme which was acceptable to everyone,
It wouldn't be acceptable to everyone.
yes, but if it was acceptable to everyone, that's what would have to happen. In other words, there has to be significant movement from everyone to try and get reconciliation in this society, to try and get healing in this society. And the idea of, let's say, not being prepared to move forward, not being prepared to engage with each other meaningfully, not being prepared to put wrongs in the past behind with a view to moving forward, with a view to making a success of our society. These are all questions which I cannot answer, which you as elected political representatives have to answer. Michael Portillo was on TV recently with a program about real journeys through South Korea, okay? You look at the history of South Korea, absolutely destroyed prior to World War II by occupation by Japan. The subject of a war between North and South after the Second World War, where millions were killed. And yet, since that time, South Korea has developed a burgeoning economy, a successful society, and has moved forward. Okay? It hasn't forgotten the past, but it has been able to move forward. My worry is that we in this society tend to drag each other back, and we are unable to embrace each other and move forward. Okay?
I have no problem with embracing people. All I do have a problem with is trying to put on the same level somebody that was blowing up in a bomb and someone who blew up a bomb. And all I was doing, with all due respect, sir, was quoting back the remarks that you made that are Hansarded and your and were also covered widely in the media. My only other question to someone else was just in relation to the 1,800 people that weren't eligible for the applications. I put in a number of written questions to the Assembly in relation to the reasoning for them not being eligible. I warmly welcome the fact that there is the no fault clause within the legislation, which disbars people who blew themselves up from applying to that. I was trying to get details of how many of those 1,800 were not eligible as a result of that. Do you not hold that data?
No,
It would be a relatively small number of applicants.
It's definitely, we could say it's a small number. The decisions, because so many of our cases, 1 in 3 cases at least, have multiple incidents. You know, so it's minimum of 3, maybe 2 or 3, up to 40, 50 incidents. So the reasons for something being ineligible is not strictly recorded against one reason. It could be presence. It could be that it's not a trouble-related incident. It could be because of Regulation 6, which brings in the convictions. You know, but we're hoping the new case management upgrades that we're getting to the current system that we have at the moment will be able to capture much more detail moving forward. And we still have a lot of cases to process, so I think there's real benefits in these upgrades down the road.
Okay, thank you. Sinead, we're going to bring you in now, please.
Thank you, and thank you to the panel for your answers so far, and thank you, Justice McAlinton, for your service as well. My question really is around the appeals process, and you know, we have I suppose in all of our offices, maybe we've been contacted with people that feel that they didn't get the answer that they wanted, and you know, their rights have been denied in terms of being maybe turned down and that. So can you just talk us through that process and any help or support that you can give to victims through that process as well?
Well, the appeal process is obviously part of the statutory framework. The first instance hearing, in order to try to reduce the risk of trauma, we have operated a system whereby the first instance hearings are mainly done on paper, unless the applicants wish to make oral submissions even to the first instance panel. So in essence, they put in their application, they go through the capita process, it goes to a panel decides whether they're entitled to a payment and also the quantum of the entitlement, the size of the entitlement. Now, if they're unhappy with the determination in relation to the eligibility, or if they're unhappy with the level of payment or the level of disability that's assessed, they have a right of appeal. Now, at the first instance hearing, the panel members under the legislation cannot challenge the capita assessment of the quantum of disability, the percentage of disability. Whereas on appeal, the panel can look behind the capita decision and make its own assessment of the level of disability. So in order to, let's say, give the applicants the best shout that they have in terms of an application under the scheme, we have implemented a system whereby the default position for appeals is that applications or appeals are heard in person. The person is entitled to come along, if they so wish, be represented by a support group or whatever, and they're entitled to give oral evidence. And having heard a number of these appeals now, I must say it is striking the impact of the evidence of these individuals in terms of what they went through, what exactly happened to them in terms of their being caught up in a troubles-related incident, and the impact that it had upon them. And it's very, very difficult not to be incredibly moved by the evidence that you get face to face. So although we don't compel people to give oral evidence, we certainly encourage it at the appeal stage. And what I've found in hearing the appeals that I've dealt with is that it really has affected me, but I think also it has helped those that give their evidence, because they do feel as if they've got a listening ear, okay? So I think the appeals process is a vital part of the scheme, and I think it is also a part of the scheme that can work effectively towards this whole goal of some form of healing. So it's, you know, it's an important part of the scheme. It's one that I would be very closely involved with, and I see the benefits, and I see the benefits of a fresh panel having had nothing to do with the application before, looking at this afresh and giving the victim the chance of an oral hearing.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's a very traumatic part of the process, but in many ways it can have value as well, as you've said. And in that process, what percentage of success do the applicants have if they go through the appeal process?
Well, maybe I'm just too soft, but I think everyone that's appealed before me has succeeded. I think in general, there are a good number of appeals, but I mean, we have to recognise that a lot of the appeals, in terms of the eligibility, they are speculative, and you know, the cases clearly fall outside the scheme, so that those cases don't get any real traction on appeal. They get a hearing, but they are pretty pointless in a sense. But I think Paul will probably have some access to the figures, but my gut feeling is that approaching maybe 50% of the appeals would probably be successful.
Yeah, just to come in there, Sinead, that's of the appeals that's actually had an appeal determination, 204, and this is correct as of earlier this week, 204 successful and 211 unsuccessful. So, as the judge has said, 50% approximately. And that trend has remained quite consistent, throughout the appeals.
And can I just ask a question? Obviously, the scheme's coming to a close, and you're saying you're anticipating a spike maybe in applications towards the end here. Or, whenever you looked at the actual figures that were given, was there any clarification of where the victims and survivors would come from? Was it mainly UK or mainly Northern Ireland, or is there areas that you need now to start a marketing campaign, maybe on the mainland, in order to get people to come forward? Is there areas where you feel that people have not come forward for this scheme, that you need to actually put resources there so that they become aware of the imminent closure?
Yeah, well, we already have targeted areas throughout the rest of England, Scotland and Wales and Republic of Ireland, and particularly anywhere outside of Northern Ireland. We have looked, we've worked with our media partners, to maybe home in on where some incidents have happened, outside of where maybe incidents might have happened. But at the same time, we can't focus solely on that, because we find a lot of our people applying to the scheme, they're no longer living in the area where the incident took place, or they maybe never did. But we have it focused it. We have kind of really strong focus with our press releases. We did press releases by constituency area right across the country, and ROI as well. So we have tried to reach as far as possible. We attend roadshows where we can, where we do offer to give information sessions, either in person or on via Teams or Zoom. Anything we can. Yep. Sorry, go on.
And Paul, just on that, in terms of constituencies, have you identified maybe some constituencies that you have had very little applicants from, that you're finding that's strange because of the history of the Troubles or anything, that you need to actually get in there and maybe work with the councils and work with other stakeholders in order to ensure that no people, or no person is left behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the interesting statistics is the limited number of applicants from ex-service personnel, okay? And when you look at that, I think one of the main justifications or explanations for that is that, under Rule 19 and under Rule 20, other payments can be taken into account, so that, let's say, pensions that have been provided for injuries sustained while on duty, etc., they, in some cases, could swallow up any potential for an award, and therefore there may be, and I'm just saying maybe, there may be a view taken amongst former service personnel that, well, it's really not worthwhile going through this whole process, because at the end of the day, we're going to be told that our present payments take account of and basically obliterate the entitlement to any payments under the scheme. So that could be an explanation, but we're certainly making every effort to ensure, through contact with veterans organisations, etc., that that people do not feel put off making applications. That the scheme is for them as well. And if there are issues in relation to the deductions from other payments, etc., well, we'll face those issues, but we always have to address every issue under the scheme in a victim-centric manner, with a victim-centric focus.
Okay,
Right,
Sinead,
okay,
sorry, I
that's
have to thank you to move on
Could
to
I
you.
just ask that those windows get opened?
Sorry. Thank you.
If Philip and Pam and that don't mind, even just the top of them, and for the people in the gallery, it's
Rubbish
awful.
for the windows. So,
You're all right
No
with the
problem
windows?
at all.
no, I'm just rubbish trying to get them open.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Timothy, I'm going to come to you now, please.
Yeah, if I could start off just by declaring interest, as I'm presently a party to a case before Justice McAlinden, which has been heard here shortly. So just to put that on the record, doesn't have any impingement or any effect on today, but just to be clear and transparent. Welcome along. I want to focus in on some of the figures that we have in the report before us here today. So 13,191 applications to the scheme. Approximately 950 of these have been received from outside the jurisdiction, which makes up about 7%. And when I was doing some research ahead of today, there was a couple of murders outside the UK and ROI that caught my attention. And it was the Australian tourists, Stephen Melrose and Nick Spanos, who were murdered by the IRA while on holiday in Netherlands, and that was 36 years ago today, or 36 years ago this month. And we have the RAF corporal and a 6-month-old daughter who was murdered by the IRA in Germany. So I'm using them two as an example to show that this isn't something that was confined to the British Isles. And on that basis, can you give us a bit more of a breakdown and really an assurance I'm looking for that we are capturing these people? 7% from outside Northern Ireland, I believe, is a relatively low number of uptake. Are we sure that what we've done to date is capturing as many people as possible?
Well, I'm happy to take, about our outreach has continued. We started that before the scheme. We've continued with that outreach throughout the last 5 years, so we just haven't targeted. We did have targeted approaches around the backdating that was due to end after 3 years of the scheme, and obviously we're having targeted approaches last September and from now right until from February this year right until August.
When you talk about media partners, what media partners are we talking about? Is it GB News? Is that one of them?
Oh no, media partner. We have a contract with a media company who we would engage with, and they would distribute it worldwide. It's not just it's picked up by media. For instance, we have probably analysis where it's been picked up by media in America. It's been picked up by media in Australia. I know you've mentioned that. It's released to various newspaper outlets, website outlets, and whoever picks up that, but it has been picked up. We've seen our awareness, some of our press stories, etc., being picked up throughout the world.
Was GB News picked up? After all, they are the biggest news broadcaster.
Well, I don't have that information in front of me, but I would imagine that they probably would have, yeah.
Well, that's something that I'd be very keen. And another avenue that I don't believe we utilise to its full potential is obviously with the elections last week in England, Scotland and Wales. Is there a communication going out to each of the new councillors, those that have got elected to the Welsh Senate and the MSPs in Scotland, to make them aware of this scheme?
Yes, that is on our kind of engagement plan. It has been out to all the pre-existing ones and throughout all the parliaments and the senates, and that will be repeated. We have that information kit ready to go. It's a very simple task. Our comms team are updating that, and it will be issued in light of the elections. So.
The targeted areas, how do you determine the targeted areas? Is it somewhere where you've mentioned the poor uptake of military? Is it somewhere where there has been in the past, a high concentration of military? There has been bases. Is that the sort of things you're looking at when you're targeting areas?
That's part of it. We sit down and we look at it. We look at areas where there was actual incidents, troublous incidents that took place. But then we also engage with every network we can. We've engaged with women's centres, we've engaged with health centres, the churches networks, the political networks out there, the victims groups, the victims commissioners, the veterans groups, the veterans commissioners. It's a long, long list, various support organisations. We have a list, it's an extensive list that we have engaged with throughout, and we continue to do so. And as you mentioned, the elections, we update that as well on the back of the elections, and there'll be fresh information kits passed out to those people as well.
Yep, so 4,700 cases, 3,039 of those determined as successful, 1,710 determined as not eligible for payment. What is the main reason you have found for cases not being eligible? I have a real concern around somebody that was maybe kept away and didn't see the body, didn't see the atrocity, to protect themselves from trauma, that is being used against them all these years later.
Yeah,
Are you finding that as a common cause of being turned down?
It is, and that's why I'm keen to emphasise that the work of healing in terms of the Troubles is not in any sense over. The bereaved really need to be looked at, and the bereaved really need to be looked after, okay? And something has to be done for the bereaved, because what we're seeing is that every effort has been made to try and shoehorn the bereaved into this scheme, and it wasn't a scheme designed for the bereaved. And by the support groups trying to shoehorn those cases in, the bereaved are being used in a sense, right? And the bereaved are being re-traumatised in a sense to try and expand this scheme, which is not about the bereaved, to deal with the bereaved issues, okay? And it's unfortunate for everyone. The nettle has to be grasped, okay? This is another nettle that has to be grasped by the politicians in terms of how to deal with the problem that remains unsolved, and that is the recognition of hurt and harm caused to people who had relatives who were killed, okay? The scheme really needs, or a scheme needs to be constructed to purposefully deal with that. Now, just coming back to the 2 Australian tourists, just to give you an example of how precise the definition is, right? The Troubles. Now, this is Regulation 5, entitlement to victims' payments. Regulation 5(1)(c). Troubles-related incident has to take place in the United Kingdom, okay, or it can take place anywhere in Europe at any time when the applicant is a British citizen, okay? So, has to be a British citizen, or was a person born in Northern Ireland and having at the time of their birth at least one parent who was a British citizen or an Irish citizen, or otherwise entitled to reside in Northern Ireland without any restriction on the period of residence, was outside the United Kingdom in service of the Crown, or was accompanying close relative of a person serving outside the United Kingdom in the service of the Crown. So the RAF, obviously, that individual and the child, yes. Unfortunately, the 2 Australian tourists, unless they had some linkage in terms of citizenship, probably wouldn't be entitled.
Even though the 2 Australians, it was a mistaken identity?
Yeah. Scheme says you have to be a British citizen or a person born in Northern Ireland and having at the time of their birth at least one parent who was a British citizen, an Irish citizen, or otherwise entitled to reside in Northern Ireland and on the business of the Crown. Those 2 people were tourists, So again, that's the scheme that I have to operate. I can't change it, okay? I cannot do anything other than faithfully interpret the legislation. But when I'm doing so, I do know that this scheme has its limitations. I do know that this scheme doesn't please everybody. I am convinced that this scheme had to be put in place by the Secretary of State with the UK Parliament, because locally it couldn't be agreed. It's unfortunate it couldn't be agreed, but it couldn't be agreed. So that's the scheme that I have to operate, okay? That's the difficulty I face day in, day out operating the scheme, and it does me great let's say, upset to think that there are a whole category of individuals, namely the bereaved, that I can't do anything for. Okay? So
How do we address that going forward? So,
Timothy, you've only got about a minute left, so if you can...
Quickly on the bereaved, so if somebody came across an atrocity and they were kept away from that atrocity that happened up the street, didn't see a body, so they don't qualify, are you saying that their definition almost is they are part of the bereaved group? And you used the term used. It's a case of victims groups aren't using them. It's a case of highlighting where there's
highlighting the issue.
Where we have a group of people that should qualify, that should be recognised, and this scheme doesn't. How do we cater for this group going forward?
You see, the thing is that my worry is that by pushing them forward into this scheme, you're raising expectations and you're risking re-traumatisation, okay? What it requires is an acceptance. Look, this scheme doesn't cover the bereaved. We need a scheme for the bereaved. Let's work together and construct a scheme for the bereaved, okay? Because, things can be achieved when people work together, okay? And it's not beyond the wit and wisdom of the combined resources in this room or the combined resources in that assembly chamber to work together to the benefit of all people in Northern Ireland. That's all I'm saying.
Briefly, just
final
your comments regarding victims and survivors. You believe within this scheme that they have been catered for, but the bereaved have been left out. There's no opportunity for them to avail of this scheme. So to me, that's a massive feeling, and it's a challenge going forward that we need to do something regarding the bereaved.
If a bereaved individual suffers an injury as a result of an act of violence, in other words, if they are, let's say, under the definition of the legislative scheme, if they come upon the immediate aftermath, and if they see the deceased person in the condition that that is immediately following injury, and they suffer a psychiatric or psychological reaction as a result, they fall within the scheme as a primary victim, not as a bereaved person. They fall within it as a primary victim of an act of terrorism or whatever. Okay, so that's how some people who are relatives of those that have been killed fall within the scheme. But others who are, let's say, don't see the horror there and then, but have to live with the trauma of the bereavement for the rest of their days, unfortunately, they fall within the scheme.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we've got other sessions, but I'm still on you to come in, please.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Paul, my first question is just based on some of the stats you gave us earlier on the appeals process. So, as of this week, there have been 204 successful appeals. I suppose, could you just speak to if there has been any commonality in those successful appeals, or has there been any common trends from a board point of view? Have any of the learning, or has any of the learning from that went on to, I suppose, inform the approach going forward?
Yes, well, there's a number of reasons why an appeal would be successful. The Justice Michael Linden referred earlier on to the actual personal testimony and personal appearance. Somebody provides oral evidence and can make a difference. That's additional evidence that wasn't available at the time of the first hearing. There could be additional information provided. So if somebody is appealing on a certain grounds, they usually do provide additional information to maybe corroborate or support their case. That can be another reason. The other reasons can be, they make a good robust challenge, and if there's learning to be arrived right from that is shared. We have an operational committee, we have a business assurance committee that, and along with the senior management team within the board, constantly review the outcomes of cases, not just appeals, but on the appeals, and if there's learnings from appeals or even adjourned cases, then that would go into the development of guidance for panels. and the guidance is provided by Justice McAlinden and signed off by Justice McAlinden. That being that, it's just guidance, but where there's lessons that can't be learned coming out of appeals. But it's usually additional information, or somebody comes along and tells their story, personal testimony, that can make and not all appeals that are successful were ineligible. Some appeals that are successful could be on the level of percentage disablement. Somebody maybe get 30%, and on appeal they provide further information, further medical evidence, and that maybe goes up to 40, 50%. So it's not automatically, it means they were unsuccessful the first time. It's maybe just on the level that they were awarded.
I think it's important to highlight that if and we do keep an eye on all panel decisions, right, and we look for consistency. And if we see that there are trends, let's say specific provisions are being interpreted differently, okay, and that's resulting in some people getting in, some people getting out. It's referred up to me, I look at it, and then I hear one of those appeals to basically give a definitive decision on what I interpret the scheme to mean. So that way there's a sort of supervisory role to ensure consistency, right? And what that should mean is that the amount of unnecessary appeals is reduced, because obviously we want to try and reduce trauma, and appealing, having to go through an appeal process has the potential to lengthen it, therefore it should be avoided if at all possible. So consistency of decision making is a key. We now have an online database of all decisions categorised in all aspects of the legislation, so that if you're looking at, let's say, the importance of convictions in relation to excluding someone, you can interrogate that database, see all the decisions, including appeal decisions, including guidance in relation to that issue, so that you are making a decision which is consistent with that body of decision making within the scheme.
Just in terms of that online database, how long has that been operational?
That has been operational now for 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you for that. Just to circle around on the assessment process that many will have to go to, just in terms of the venues that these assessments take place in, are any community-based venues looked at or used, especially for those applicants who maybe for various reasons may feel uncomfortable going to?
Basically what I've said is that if there are reasons for an assessment to take place in the home, it will take place in the home. Okay? If there are reasons why an applicant feels that the applicant cannot travel to Northern Ireland to have the appeal heard because of the risk of re-traumatisation, memories flooding back as to what happened when they were last in Northern Ireland, we would travel wherever we have to go to hear that appeal, okay? So it's all about making sure that this journey is as trauma free as possible, but recognising that we cannot cut out every form of trauma. But in terms of assessment, we trialled telephone assessment to ensure that people could chat to someone on a telephone line. We found that in some cases people thought that was very impersonal. Okay, so face to face, yes, face to face. Where is best? And if an applicant requests some form of assessment, either in the, let's say, support group's office, which we've done in the past, right? We'll do that. In the home, we'll do that. It's just wherever we can make the applicant feel most comfortable, most able to tell their story.
That is the most important element of all of this, and I'm heartened to hear that that approach has been taken, and based on what you have just said there, it seems to be on a case-by-case basis. And obviously one size doesn't fit everybody in that sense. One final question, Chair, just around records and evidence gathering. Obviously, due to the nature of our conflict here, there has been historical mistrust within the nationalist community in terms of coming forward to institutional and state bodies in that sense. Does the board accept, or would the board accept any community-based records along the lines of even parish records where somebody may have approached a priest?
We will draw upon every piece of material that we can get, okay? If it's a newspaper cutting, we've used those, if it's, we have tried to avail of every piece of information that we can get our hands on. There's no hierarchy of truth here, okay? If there is compelling evidence from whatever source, that will be looked at, okay? So, I want to reassure people that, first of all, the material that they provide is provided in confidence. It doesn't go outside the board. There's very, very strict structures in place to ensure confidentiality of information that's provided, okay? But secondly, there is no bar in terms of the source of that information. If there's something relevant, that's the key. If it's relevant, we'll listen to it. We will read it. It doesn't matter where it comes from.
That clarity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pam, I think you wanted in for a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to say thank you very much for your attendance at committee today. I wasn't here last year either, so it was very useful to be able to read over the entirety of the Hansard from the session last year and to get a better grip of all of the issues. It's clearly very important work, and I welcome that there are a third of applicants that have been through the process successfully. I think that's very positive. I suppose it would be useful to maybe hear more in terms of testimonies, but I fully get the point that it's an individual's own choice, and clearly if they've come through great trauma and successfully got to the other end, they may not want to rehash it and relive it by actually talking about it further. So that's very important. I suppose it's one small question really, and that's in terms of is there access to support or support for those of you within this organisation that are also dealing with other people's trauma and experiences and having to process that? Because clearly it is very difficult, it's very sensitive, but those who are at the listening end of it and having to process the applications and listen to all those testimonies will be affected. So is there an outlet for...
Yeah, I think we have been very careful in relation to that, because obviously CAPITA, who deal with the assessment of disability, probe into issues of the trauma and harm that's been caused, and they have their own structures in place to ensure the well-being of their staff, okay? In terms of so we don't really look at the issue of the well-being of CAPITA staff, other than to reassure ourselves that CAPITA have systems in place to deal with that. In terms of the board, yes, the board, that's one of the key issues that we have been keen to address, which would be to provide trauma training to those that are exposed to this day in, day out in the processing of applications, especially in the context of, you find that quite a lot of the staff are quite young, right? And quite a lot of the staff really had no personal experience, right? Yeah. And so they're coming to this afresh, Like there are others who remember it firsthand, okay? But what I have, tried to ensure is that those that are coming to this firsthand, it's new to them, that the support mechanisms are in place to enable them to ventilate, enable them to talk about their experiences, enable them to express how this is impacting them. And I think that, the senior members of the board, Paul and Alan, etc., they're all experienced individuals who've been through the troubles and who would be very astute to signs of staff not being able to cope in respect of dealing with the deluge of information in relation to applications. So there's counselling available, and the board would be very, very, let's say, aware of the need to ensure that we keep a close eye out for signs of people not being able to cope dealing with this information day in, day out, especially those that were, let's say, they're coming fresh to this. And, you know, the number of times that I have heard comments from people of that age group about, I couldn't believe that that happened. I couldn't believe that this took place in our society. And it did, you know. So you have to be careful in dealing with those individuals. And we try our best in the board to give them the support that they need.
Excuse me. Okay, thank you, Pam. Well, Justice McAlinden, Paul and Anthony, I just want to thank you very much for coming today and for all the work. I hadn't realised, Justice McAlinden, that you were doing this voluntary. It's very noble of you. As you can understand and appreciate from this committee, the welfare of victims and survivors of the Troubles is certainly something we care passionately about, and it's obviously very important work that you're involved in. So thank you. Good luck over the next few months in terms of processing the applications, and possibly we may see you again before the end of the mandate, but thank you for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Didn't enjoy that at all, but yeah. Members, I'm just going to maybe suggest a 5-minute comfort break if people are okay with that, and then we'll resume. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, members.
Okay, thank you.
Committee Room 30, sound. 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 Committee Room 30, Sound.
Thank you. Okay, members, we're back in public session. So just to net off that last session, so were there any actions, Clerk? Is there anything that, or anybody got any suggestions for any follow-up?
Perhaps writing to the board just in terms of the numbers excluded and the reasons and the details, including in respect to Regulation 6. And there's also Mr. Gaston's point about the marketing and GB News.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else?
I think that was fine.
All content?
Yeah, I suppose it maybe come later, Chair, but you know the issue of the funding for the support groups.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's a big part of the next session. So
yeah.
yes. Yeah. But thank you. Okay, members, we're going to move on to item 7, and I'm going to seek your agreement for Hansard. to record this as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Ms. Hansard here?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, just in terms of this briefing, from the Victims and Survivors Service and the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors in relation to the Victims Payment Scheme and the Victims Support Programme. So members, I'm going to refer you to pages 68. Order please, thanks. I'm going to refer you to pages 68 to 74 of the pack for the clerk's brief, pages 75 to 93 of the pack for a copy of the written briefing from VSS, and pages 94 to 101 of the pack for a copy of the written briefing from CVS. Okay, so I'm going to welcome to the meeting Mr. Andrew Walker, who's the Chief Executive of the Victims and Survivors Service, Ms. Emma Dargan, who's the Head of Community Partnership there as well, Mr. Joe McVeigh, who's the Commissioner within the Victims and Survivors Commission, and Ms. Tina McCann, who's the Director of Policy Development, Research and Engagement. So you're all very welcome, so thank you so much, and thank you for submitting your papers in advance, and certainly to the Commissioner there in terms of the correspondence recently, in terms of your letters to the Executive Office. So I'm just going to ask you to make some opening remarks, and I'm going to start with you, Andrew, because you were very accommodating in expanding the panel. We appreciate that we've asked you to cover a number of areas today. So you go ahead, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak with you today on behalf of the Victims and Survivors Service. The committee has asked me to cover 3 areas of work in this session. Firstly, to comment on the Trouble's Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme, TPDPS. Secondly, to address some of the matters raised by members at recent committees in relation to how we manage therapy sessions where clients do not attend, known as DNAs. And thirdly, to provide some information on the outcome of the recent Victims Support Programme funding call. So starting with TPDPS, VSS, as you know, does not administer the scheme, and we have no role in eligibility, policy or determinations. Determinations are made by the Victims Payment Board. Our role is to coordinate application-related support, health and wellbeing support, and to release relevant information from our records, and to fund 5 community and voluntary organisations who provide direct, practical, day-to-day support to applicants throughout their journey. As at 31st of March 2026, just under 13,000 applications have been submitted to the scheme, with over 68% of those supported by the 5 C&V organisations. The VPB has repeatedly acknowledged that these applications are more complete, better evidenced and easier to progress, and this reflects not only the professionalism of staff, but also the trust which victims and survivors place in those organisations. VSS has also processed over 2,700 individual information requests, often involving complex and historic records, with an average turnaround time of 13 days. This is an important contribution to the system, helping to avoid a duplication of evidence gathering and reduce the resulting risk of re-traumatisation. Whilst the system is making determinations and delivering payments, there are some clear and ongoing challenges for applicants. The issue raised most consistently is timeline. Applications take time because of the factors inherent within the scheme. Records going back decades, multiple incidents, and many applicants undergoing mental health assessment or diagnosis for the first time. The impact on individuals can be profound, particularly where a difficult process concludes with a negative determination. We also regularly hear concerns around eligibility for those who are bereaved, about historic lack of diagnosis for psychological injury, and a growing pressure as we approach the final closing date of the 30th of August 2026. Despite these challenges, relationships across VSS, the Victims Payment Board, government departments and the community and voluntary sector remain constructive and solution focused. As we move into the final phase of applications and then into several years of determinations and appeals, continued resourcing and partnership working will be crucial, including sustained support for those who could not apply. So turning now to the second area of discussion for today, I'll briefly outline the context around the issue of did not attend or DNA therapy sessions within the Victim Support Programme. VSS funds a wide range of community and voluntary organisations to deliver therapies which are a core part of our support for victims and survivors. Each year, more than 21,000 talking therapy sessions and 17,000 complementary therapy sessions are delivered primarily through sessional therapists working with community partner organisations. As with any therapeutic service, some sessions will not proceed because a client does not or cannot attend for very understandable reasons. And at present, the practice for dealing with DNAs varies widely across our funded organisations, with payments to sessional practitioners ranging from 0% to 100% of the normal sessional rate, and with different thresholds for how many DNAs can take place before considering a pause or an end in treatment. Through co-design discussions with our C&V partners ahead of the recent funding call, there was broad agreement that a more consistent sector-wide approach would be beneficial. Demand for services has grown significantly in recent years. Clients report that legacy developments and TPDPS are key factors in the increasing need for support. The Victim Support Programme has been heavily oversubscribed as a result. So against that backdrop of funding pressure, VSS initially proposed 3 key changes. Firstly, we would better support victims and survivors to remain engaged by increasing the maximum number of funded DNA sessions per client from 2 to 3. Secondly, we would better support therapists by significantly increasing sessional therapy rates by 13% for talking therapies and by 17% for complementary therapies. And thirdly, we would introduce a consistent DNA payment rate of 50% for late or no notice cancellations, with aligns with common practice both within the current VSP and across similar public sector contracts. Views from community partners in this proposal were mixed, reflecting the existing variation across the sector, and I respect that range of experience, and as a result, the implementation of the proposed approach has been paused. Existing arrangements remain in place, and we're actively engaging with partners to seek consensus on a way forward. So finally, I'll just briefly set out the context, approach and outcome of the recent funding call, which is the third area, funding call for the Victim Support Programme. The previous VSP was awarded in 2017 as a 3-year programme, and since then funding has rolled forward on several occasions. With a new victim strategy now in place and in line with good practice, VSS opened a funding call in 2025 for a new 2-year programme. This provided an opportunity for existing organisations to seek continued support and for new organisations to come forward. In preparation for the funding call, VSS engaged with our community and voluntary partners, including consultation events undertaken jointly with the Commission for Victims and Survivors. This engagement, along with analysis of service delivery data, costs and projections, generated a range of funding scenarios and resulting impacts to inform the departmental business case for the programme funding. In total, 44 applications were received in response to the funding call, and following a robust assessment process, 35 organisations were approved for VSP funding. Demand significantly exceeded the available funding. Bid values of over 11 million per year across those 35 organisations were assessed as representing value for money, with an available indicative budget for allocation of around 8 million per year. The VSS board therefore considered a range of options to allocate funding in a way that maintained community access and choice, geographic spread and organisational sustainability. As a result, almost all funded organisations in 26-27 will receive an allocation which is higher than their opening 25-26 position. Funding has been set aside to cover inflationary pay increases for all C&V staff within the next 2 years. And that is a significant achievement within the current financial environment across the public sector. Access for victims and survivors has been secured and experienced staff within the sector retained. We know, however, that demand for services will exceed supply, leading to waiting lists and growing pressure on C&V partners. VSS will work to continue to work with funded organisations in the coming months to help address unavoidable pressures, and we remain committed to seeking opportunities for additional funding for the programme where possible. All activity delivered through the VSP will contribute directly to the implementation of the Strategy for Victims and Survivors 2024 to 2034, and I look forward to reporting the positive outcomes for victims and survivors, which will be delivered within the programme over the next 2 years. So thank you. There's quite a lot there because of the 3 areas, and I know Joe has some comments before we take your questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Go ahead, please, Joe.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for inviting me back. I was very conscious that I actually had invited myself, so I appreciate your your good humour, and conscious I'm following an accountant, a judge and a tax collector, so I'm in very good company today. And I just want to obviously introduce and acknowledge my colleague with me, Tina McCann, who's the Director of Policy Development, Research and Acknowledgement. And again, I know they're not in a room, but to acknowledge the comments made by Justice McAlinden, which I thought were very helpful in setting the context. And if I may, Chair, with your permission, just acknowledge some of the people sitting behind me who are victims and survivors, and having met a few of them before lunchtime, I think if we ever need examples of the diversity of victims and survivors and the pain people have suffered, it's certainly in the room. So I just want, if I may, just to thank you for that. Members were aware, I think most people here were aware when we attended on the 11th of February, and in the following week we were joined by some of the key organisations. And both those sessions, you'll be hopefully minded that there were a number of areas of consensus One of them was the issue around the impending funding crisis that people were very concerned about, and also looking to the future in terms of what's going to happen in 2 years' time with the potential end of Piece 2 and what that will mean for victims and survivors. I suppose, in short, really the concerns we raised on the day and on the 18th of February have come to pass. Once the funding decisions were made, I was inundated with phone calls from groups and individuals very concerned at the outcome and the implications for victims and survivors, and from groups, and since then have convened many meetings with groups just to get a sense of what the concerns are and what the implications are. And in short, and just picking up Andrew's point, I think the impact will be very much in the short term in terms of reduced services, withdrawal of services, additional waiting times, longer waiting times, increased demand for services, and I think a weakening of the infrastructure. And I would say at this point, that's sometimes in these situations it's easy to point the finger and say, well, why that's happened. I think it's important to acknowledge the fact, and Andrew referred to it, that we have, thanks to the Executive Office, have a ring-fenced budget. And I'm very mindful, and a number of weeks ago a number of colleagues in the voluntary and community sector were here and were facing very difficult times. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, and the work that Andrew and the team have done within VSS in putting together the programme and having it delivered, I think, very efficiently. And I think primarily in the centre of that work was the work done by all the groups who gave their time, their energy, and very much their heart in the hope that this time what they were identifying would be reflected in the funding outcome. And very simply, what we're facing a situation, and again, it'd be no surprise to members who I know will have constituents in their offices on a weekly basis. We're facing, I suppose, such an increase in demand over the past 10 years from victims and survivors, and a changing nature of the demand. I think that's very important as well. We have groups facing increased costs all the time. We have, I suppose, an incredibly changing legacy landscape. Probably if we'd been in this room maybe 10 or 15 years ago, people might have said, well, this is a situation where demand's likely to go down. That's not the case at all. You'll have seen, and Justice Michael Linden, I thought was really impressive in talking about the work of the Victims Payment Board and RTN. And those are tremendous parts of the infrastructure, but they have caused an increased demand on services, because it's the wraparound support that individuals coming through those services need from the voluntary and community sector partners. We have, again, people watching the news today will have seen, hopefully, I haven't watched it, but in the King's speech, the Troubles Bill coming through, and the Troubles Bill itself and all the discussions around legacy is triggering for a lot of victims and survivors, and those discussions that go on within families and in communities as to what that means. We have the reformed, or hopefully reformed, Legacy Commission, and as and when that's ever up and running properly. But their work currently is causing demands in the sector when families and individuals are coming to them for support, and in turn those individuals need support from the voluntary and community sector partners. We also will have, again, with the Troubles Bill going forward, we'll have a new information recovery body. We may have work through oral history and memorialisation. All those things are causing increased demand. And yet we're left with an infrastructure that's sitting on a flat budget. And in essence, I know it's not an accountancy term, but if my needs are X and I'm given Y, I'm facing a shortfall or a deficit, and I have to try and manage that. I suppose in coming today here in partnership with VSS, it's really, I suppose, two very simple asks. One, we would ask the Executive Committee to seek support from the ministers and the executive colleagues to meet the urgent need for that shortfall at the moment. And that, I think, the primary responsibility does lie with the executive. But I also think there's responsibility in other departments. As you know, the Victims and Survivors strategy is an executive strategy, and then we would expect all departments to be contributing to that. And I also think it's important at a more strategic level that we have intergovernmental discussions, because the causes of this work don't sit simply with the executive here in Northern Ireland. There's responsibility, I think, on Westminster. There's also responsibility on the government from the Republic of Ireland to try and come together and support victims and survivors and support the infrastructure. And underpinning that, I suppose our second ask, is there a need to ensure that we're not sitting here in the same place in 2 years' time? So I think there's a need for a collective agreement that we need proper research, we need the insights, we need the work, so that we're able to say very clearly what are the needs of victims and survivors now, what are the needs going forward, and how do we meet those gaps and ensure that through supporting victims and survivors we are trying to build a better future here. So Chair, I'd just like to again thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and again thank you for allowing us to shoehorn ourselves in, and again very happy to and very welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you. Anything from the ladies before we go to questions? No, okay. Okay, so thank you again for that. So, Andrew, you're aware that we had our session beforehand. I'm not sure, were you in the gallery or whether you heard?
Oh, I was outside, heard a little bit of it just.
Okay, so what it sort of indicated is even though there's going to be the deadline for application 31st of August, it'll possibly take 5 years for those to be processed. So I think you indicated in your remarks there that there's 5 organisations that are supporting to make those applications. And what will that support change over the course of that 5 years? Do you anticipate that those groups will be continue to be engaged, basically?
No, I very much so. It's always been known, I think, that the need for the groups to be involved is not just around application support, and that application support will come to an end when the scheme closes, but post-application support, there's been significant assistance provided to victims and survivors over the past years in that area, and then appeals, and those 2 areas will continue, I think, for a number of years yet. I'm not sure if there was a timeline provided earlier. That
was an estimation, but yeah.
Yeah, but it will continue for a number of years. So you've got that sort of welfare application type support, and the teams that are in place, we've been very clear that they will be required for a number of years to come. I think within a couple of years they may start to scale down slightly because fewer new applications coming forward, more determinations being made, but also appeals then starting to ramp up in future years. So those teams absolutely need to be in place going forward. There's the wider wraparound support, which touches a little bit to what Joe's been saying. The TPDPS is one of the things that groups tell us has brought most people to their doors in the last number of years, and I think particularly as the scheme continues to make those determinations and people go through their sort of difficult decisions and potentially difficult appeal processes, it's not just about explaining and helping with determinations and helping to attend oral hearings and respond in that way. It's also the wider impact that is having on people, and also on those who have not been able to apply for the scheme. We talked, I'm sure it was mentioned a little bit about the bereaved. It's not to say that the bereaved as a group are completely excluded from the scheme. There will be many bereaved who find that they are included, but probably a greater number that are not eligible for the scheme under those rules. And I think the health and wellbeing support needs to continue for those people as well in the longer term.
Okay, thank you. And just even to move on to that second point there, and you were advised there that there's a need to manage expectations over the next few months because obviously the scheme's closing and people may put in applications, but as we know as legislators here, the board can only work with what's on the face of the bill and what's in the regulations in terms of who's eligible and who's not. And I'm just wondering, to what degree is the guidance around that, do you think, robust enough for those people who are applying or those who are supporting those to apply, to make sure that people don't feel that they're eligible when they're actually not?
I think that those people who are the welfare staff within those 5 organisations have now supported so many applications through the process. They've got a really good feel for that. But I think there's still, with every appeal, there potentially comes a new outcome and a new understanding of what can meet the criteria and what doesn't. So I think that will just be a continual learning process. But you know, applying with the support of those staff within those 5 organisations absolutely gives people the best opportunity to understand where the boundaries are within the scheme. I think that those staff and those organisations will be very reluctant to tell anyone that they shouldn't apply or can't apply, because it is worth testing individual cases. So many cases are unique and different, and I don't think we want to be in a place where we're saying you can't apply, but trying to share some of the knowledge of what has come out of the cases that they've had, and they've had a considerable number of cases now go through original application, determination and appeal to really sort of build that knowledge.
Okay, just to drill down a bit, and I'm very aware of the sensitivities around this, but where somebody's clearly not eligible, would there still be support then for that person to make an application? Is that what you're saying?
I'm clearly not eligible, because there's so many areas of this that are being tested. Some of them are being tested, I think, through the court. So it is a difficult one. accept.
Which is
There'll be
not
some
your
people-
place to do the assessment, is it? Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
you've got to let that process run its course. But I think staff in those organisations will very clearly be giving their experience of what has and hasn't been successful to date to help people make the best choice for them.
Okay.
If I could, Chair, just building on that, I think to speak to the issue of infrastructure and staffing, as you'd appreciate for the staff sitting with people and very difficult, listening to very difficult stories. It can be quite difficult, and picking up the point that Ms Cameron made earlier on about the support to staff dealing with that. But inevitably when people come and tell their story, what happens is it opens up so many other stories and so many other needs for support, and whether that's counselling, complementary therapies, any type of support, and the organisations are then faced with the question, well, how do we provide those supports? So I think that wraparound we have with the Victims Payment Board and with RTN and with the Legacy Commission, so many unintended consequences of saying we want to engage, we want to be part of this, but for the victims and survivors and for the staff, it is actually causing increasing demands on their time and on their resources.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stick with you, Joe. So again, thanks for sharing those letters. We did, as a committee, agree to write, and that has happened on the 22nd of April, but we haven't received a response. I'm just wondering, have you ever received a response from the Executive Office yet?
We had, sorry, in relation to the first deputy.
In relation to the funding levels for groups.
Yeah, we have, and again, I think we've written to everybody we thought was, including members of the committee, which is great, and thank you for your responses. We had a meeting with the Deputy First Minister and the First Minister and with the Junior Minister, I think on the 28th of April, which I think was I must say I was delighted to have that response. My read in that meeting was that there was a sense to try and find a way to meet the short-term issue we're facing. And again, all credit to the Deputy First Minister and the Junior Minister for that support, and from the executive team. And again, it's not surprising, where we're concerned is that we don't lose that sense of urgency, that we can build on that. I think getting a meeting was great, and having the session with yourselves today is very helpful, but we're now encouraging the executive officials to translate that into action, because what we don't want to be moving into the June or the summertime, and then organisations are faced with having to withdraw or reduce services. So I was very pleased with a very positive response, and we're hoping now we can see some action.
Okay, thank you. Just a last one for me then, and you've mentioned the new Troubles Bill, and I think we covered it the last time you were here, and it's really just about your engagement with the Northern Ireland office in terms of providing and making sure there's a voice for victims and survivors in that legislative scrutiny process. I'm just wondering, can you speak to that, what's been happening in the last few months, please?
Again, we've been actively engaged with the Northern Ireland office just to try and, I suppose, really put on the table that for a number of their mechanisms and proposals, victims and survivors, in our view, don't appear to be at the forefront. There's a lot of emphasis on the bureaucracy and all the rest of it. So we're saying to them, you need to look at the processes you're putting in place. The government will be bringing forward amendments, and we'll be scrutinising those very carefully to make sure the victims and survivors are there. Our primary focus at the time was the proposed Victims and Survivors Group, which has been proposed by the Secretary of State, and we've made it clear in correspondence and meetings we don't think that's appropriate, and we don't think that will work. So we're very mindful. I'm good, if I may, just ask Tina. Tina, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, so there's a couple of areas that we have particularly discussed, raised with the NIO, but been consulting with victims and survivors. One of them is around the Clause 8, which is around the Victims and Survivors Advisory Group. And then the other area relates to Part 4 of the Legacy Act 2023, which was never enacted but is still in statute. And it's the bit that speaks to reconciliation, memorialisation, those measures. And as well as that, the NIAC have launched an inquiry into reconciliation. So we've been looking at those areas in particular as well, but we meet with them regularly. But our understanding is that it was carried over, so we were kept apprised of that. But I think what we constantly hear from victims and survivors is the time delay. It's just being pushed and pushed and pushed. As well as issues that we're aware of with the ICR and the review that they'll be going under. So Yep.
I think just briefly on that, it unfortunately, as with all these things, our focus is on victims and survivors, and what builds confidence in victims and survivors. Unfortunately, this process is having the opposite effect.
Okay, I'm not sure whether these were in the room, but at the start we agreed that we were going to invite the ICR back and write to the NIO as well around the May review this week to speak to that point. So we'll keep you posted over the date of that. I'm going to go to the Deputy Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again very much for coming and sharing information with us today, and particularly for the work that you do working with that range of groups that deliver those services to those who seek those services. I want to ask a couple of questions. First of all, within the scope of the scheme, what work do you do? Because we talked to Justice McLinden about how they draw people into the scheme and find them and identify them. What work do you do, and what work do you do with the voluntary groups to identify people who would be eligible for the scheme? And at the same time, what is your experience of the groups that you work with? What difficulties do they face in both as we approach this perhaps hard end or soft end of the scheme, but also are there people that they are still working with that need encouragement or support to actually to take the step to make an application?
Maybe I'll pick up some of that first. Certainly in terms of the difficulties for the groups as we approach the end and the deadline, we do have, I suppose, some experience of this from the deadline that was there slightly earlier in the scheme. Yes. For the backdating amount, which ultimately didn't come into force, but all of the months leading up to that, it was assumed that deadline would kick in. And obviously the groups that we have, they have waiting lists of people for their support, and I think all of the groups were taking steps to ensure that no one would be left on that waiting list without an application submitted. So whether that be prioritising certain applications, sharing information of other support that's available from other groups that may have shorter waiting lists, and it's absolutely people's choice which group they may want to avail of support, but we want to make sure that they're aware that there might be other options for them. So that was something that could and was done. Helpfully, I think at that time, and I think it's something similar is happening at the end of the scheme, the Victims Payment Board themselves said that if an application has to come in a little bit less complete than it would otherwise be, and one of the examples given recently was if the certification of ID documents hadn't been completed, get the application in, and as long as that application or that certification follows fairly promptly thereafter. So that's a really helpful sort of practical thing that can be done to make sure that no one is left on a waiting list at the end of this process. It could well be that there's another spike in requests for support leading to a spike in applications naturally towards the end of any scheme. That will happen. The groups all have pretty good levels of staffing in them now. There has been times when staffing has been below full complement, but I think we're pretty close to full complement with those staff teams now, so that's another positive. In terms of making people aware of the scheme, the groups are really best placed to do that, and information flowing down from the board to the groups to disseminate out through all of those networks and reach as many people. I know through the Victims Forum is probably another route, Joe, in terms of those people who maybe aren't connected with groups, and not everyone is. And of course we had the leaflet drop that happened, I think that was around 2023. So there has been reasonable coverage, I think. There'll probably be areas where there have been less applications coming forward, and I think it's, responsibility for promotion of the scheme does rest with the Victims Payment Board, and they will take those steps. But certainly I think my experience is anything that we can do and that the groups can do to amplify that message, we have done and will do again in the coming weeks.
And just briefly on that point, what research is being done? What analysis is being done of the period of time that we've come through the scheme and payment and support and all of that, to see whether we genuinely have identified everybody that would be eligible? Is there research going on in the background? Is this all being verified as something that has actually achieved something? Research.
Yeah, if I may just pick up on that, if I may.
Yes, please.
2 points, and I agree with what Andrew's saying in terms of the promotion through the groups. I think it's very effective, and again, we've promoted I suppose our experience is probably slightly different because we would work, as Andrew does, we would meet with a lot of the groups and also have the opportunity to meet with people providing first-hand support for people going through this scheme. And Justice Michael and the team were really good at the statistics and the transformational effect. But for a lot of people going through it, it is incredibly traumatising. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that whether people are, supported on their interviews or appeal or appearing before boards, I think it's really important to emphasise the cost that takes and what that takes out of people, and also in the staff and the time required to do that. So and that need. So we're also interested in trying to track what is that experience, because it's great. I mean, people have got a result that's marvellous, but what about everyone else? How they're experiencing it? And the research. So maybe just pass to Tina, because we're being asked to comment on the whether it's a good idea or not to close the door at the end of August.
So we engage fairly regularly with the Victims Payments Board to build a picture. The difficulty with this scheme always was that it was a very specific criteria around who could be eligible, knowing the degree of the type of disability, where they were, displacement of people. So you maybe know how many people were, like we know from our population surveys and research how many were injured, but the degree of injury we didn't know, or where they would be. Allied to that, you have a large population of service personnel who aren't here, people who were displaced to the Republic as well. So we have to really build a picture and then try to understand why people haven't come forward if they were. The GAD figures were a rough indication, but also we need to understand, well, if we think, for example, 950, you may think that's about fairly accurate, others might think it's not. And the board have been very good at sharing their intelligence that they've gathered from roadshows, engaging with different veterans representatives about maybe why people choose not to apply. And then if they identify a barrier to people accessing the scheme, working to find solutions to increase confidence in people coming forward for it. The groups are very good because they have that local knowledge in the communities. So what we're trying to do now is can really build a picture of what that looks like now at this stage as the scheme comes to the end that was indicated in the regulations.
Just one final area, and you touched on this in your first comment, and that was about where we go with all of this in terms of both reconciliation and memorialisation. Reconciliation has been an ongoing part of our troubles, probably since the very beginning of our troubles. People have been working to reconcile our communities. At this stage now, where are we in respect of the work that was required with the time and distance and space that has taken place since some of the very raw early days of people working together? I'm thinking of people like the Peace People and others who worked incredibly hard on the ground to deliver while the troubles were happening all around us. Where are we in relation to how we genuinely reconcile this community to what happened in the past and educate and encourage us to make sure that it never happens again?
I think that's an incredibly important question, and I think one that sits at the heart of why all of us and the people behind me are involved in this work, because I think in a sense, unless we try and look at that, we're not going to make any difference. I think people's answer to that will be personal and very subjective. Just as a quick illustration, as a very quick story, I got a lift up here this morning from somebody who's from North Belfast, and it was the first time he'd ever been up here before in the grounds of Stormont. And I asked him why, and he just, as people do, and I'm sure you find this, shared his own story of his family and their experience of the troubles and what they've been through. And it just struck me, and he said himself, he feels he and his family have come such a long way. And I think you have to take, I take those as examples of anecdotal evidence that there is change, and I think the fact that we need to be looking to that. But I think fundamentally, as part of that, is we need to be very clear that we're listening to the voice of victims and survivors, and we're very mindful that legacy isn't something in the past; it's something that's with us at the moment, and we need to be very mindful of those individuals and their needs. And part of that is why we're here today. Is, without that work, without the infrastructure, I think there's a danger things could go very badly wrong. I wouldn't take it for granted.
And just maybe add one thing that within the strategy for victims and survivors, the 10-year strategy, there is references there to both memorialisation and education pieces. So those are areas that will be fleshed out and developed within the strategy. And in terms of sort of that collaboration, we see a huge amount of collaboration between the community and voluntary groups that we fund and the memberships of those groups, delivering activities and engagements together in many cases, particularly within some of the resilience work within the peace programme. So yeah, it's all there, and it has to be continually delivered over the course of this strategy.
But it does speak, if I may, Chair, it does also speak to whether it's memorialisation. I know people here know a lot more about it than I would, but memorialisation and oral history can be areas that bring people together, but they can also be incredibly divisive issues, and therefore, it speaks to investing in the sector.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Timothy, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. For me, politics is all about priorities. It's not about the non-binding motions we fill order papers with. It's about how we spend our money. And on that basis, I am greatly concerned that when there's an evidence need of 11.2 million, we have a shortfall of 3.3 million. We've heard time and time again, Andrew, you talked about demand has grown significantly. Joe, you have said listening to the voice of victims and survivors is key. You've also said about, if this short fund will mean reduced services because we're seeing an increase in demand. It's all very concerning. It's concerning that we have a number of delivery partners who've come to Storm today to protest. That's how serious that they view this shortfall. There's an evidence need, so it's not as if it's a number in a spreadsheet, this is what the group needs. It's an evidence need of 11.2 million and a shortfall we have of 3.3 million. What will that mean for groups? We've looked at it and we've heard today is that 68% of the applications have been supported by the 5 groups. And we're saying all nice warm words, but my fear is that we're leaving people behind. My fear is that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Back in 2000, when we were talking about victims and survivors, it was very much, this grouping of people will decrease over time, where I would argue, the services that they need and require increases over time as they age, but as well as that, we're seeing generational trauma really come through. So if we're really putting victims and survivors first, you need to pay for that. That needs to be funded. What will this shortfall mean? What is the feedback?
I know. I think again, I couldn't overemphasise it enough, Mr. Gaston. I think listen to the groups and individuals of the past 3 weeks. They are incredibly concerned, and again mindful of the fact that people have taken the time to be here today. As I indicated earlier, it will result in, I think, a reduction and a withdrawal of services in those areas which some people might look at things like talking therapies, complementary therapies, counselling. Those are incredibly important if we're trying to build support and resilience, because if you don't provide the support at that level, what is the impact upon the health service and on people's the mental health week? I think that's going to be seen very quickly, and it's certainly over the summer, or certainly in August or September. So again, our appeal is that needs to be dealt with now. The investment, I think it's a question for the executive and for the wider assembly. I think, and you use the term the tip of the iceberg, I think the identified need is only a tip of the iceberg, because in a sense what we're looking at here are the individuals who work with and engage with our groups. I met somebody today who hadn't engaged with any of the groups for over 30 years. And again, all of us in our work will come across people who haven't engaged. So I think there's a whole, a silent group out there that we aren't touching on. So I think they're going to come forward. All the things we've touched on earlier in terms of the troubles bill and all these various mechanisms, that's going to increase the demand. And I say that, and you know, it's not a contradiction, but I'm very mindful there are so many demands on the executive and the executive budget, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. You know, we've, I think, from our meetings with the Deputy First Minister and the Junior Minister, had, you know, a very positive response. But I agree wholeheartedly. It needs to be tackled, and it needs to be tackled now, because what we're doing, if we don't do this now, we're just storing up trouble. We could be sitting here, you know, 24 months' time. We'll be looking at the end of Peace Plus programme, and you know, none of us at this point know how, if that's going to be replaced. So if we don't have that, where's the investment in this sector? I think the last time I was here, I acknowledged the success of having the victims and survivors strategy, but having a strategy without the proper level of investment is simply just a wish list. So I think, and you know, I'll pass over to Andrew, but I think we need to see the investment now, and it's also, if I may say, you know, looking at other departments around the executive table, and it's also, and I mentioned it earlier on, looking to Westminster and the government from the Republic of Ireland. I think it's important that all governments play their part here, and that is also why it's so important that you have the evidence to say how is this going to play out over the next 5 years, not simply saying can we do something about, you know, plugging a hole in the ship at the moment. And I think, you know, Victims Payment Board, the Legacy Commission, you know, it's great to see those mechanisms here, but it's the impact they have, and you know, frankly, I would argue they're not paying their part of it. Thank you, Chair.
I would repeat what Joe said in terms of being mindful of the pressures across the public sector. We're not alone in this, and we have had a protection in cash terms, but of course a protection in cash terms, whenever everything else is increasing in cost, squeezes what can be delivered for that budget. We know that the cost of delivering, you know, we talked about the demand for services increasing for the reasons that Joe's outlined, but the cost of delivering those services goes up every year. The cost of paying for the staff within the sector goes up every year. The community and voluntary sector is absolutely central to the model. That is the delivery mechanism for all of this support and services, so it's absolutely crucial that those groups are supported as well as we can. There's 140 plus staff funded within the victim support programme, and any support that can be provided has to come on a multi-year format, because it is supporting staff to continue to deliver those services over a number of years. So an injection of cash that doesn't come back the following year just moves the problem to the following year. So
just if I may, quick illustration, and there was a lot of talk this week about the review of the Legacy Commission, and there was a reference in the report to a budget of £60 million that has been spent so far in comparison to our ask of over £3 million. I think that's 0.05%. So what we're talking about here in terms of investment in infrastructure in Northern Ireland is minuscule.
It is very much an investment. Has there been any cost that if the services are depleted, the same services aren't being offered by the groups, how much that will cost the health services? Anybody done any work around what that projected would be? The value of work that is being done by these groups. And we heard earlier on with Justice McLendon, the sector of people, the group of people, which is the bereaved, who essentially have been left out. Like, they need help, they need support. Warm words won't come alongside them. Warm words won't point them in the right direction of where to get that help and support. And if they have to go and join waiting lists, it's just going to create more of a bottleneck there.
Yeah, no, I mean, very, very much so. The whole idea of that sort of shift left agenda to keep people out of statutory healthcare is very important, and I think the sector plays a key role in that for victims and survivors. A lot of the programmes that we have around social isolation and loneliness, that is keeping people well, and there's obviously a significant saving there to the wider health service from doing that, so that's crucially important to continue. And in terms of the bereaved, again, it's something that's in the strategy, so it's something that has to be addressed at some point during the period of the strategy. For VSS, we have what we can do for the bereaved. We have still got an open scheme for a much more modest level of financial support each year for the bereaved. That is still open, and we have reviewed all of our frameworks to ensure that the bereaved see themselves in some of those areas of support, and that as many doors are opened as possible. So within our gift and within what we can do, we're very conscious of the bereaved. I think some of the research that we do within Peace Plus will focus on the bereaved, and that might lead to some more recommendations or actions.
Just very briefly, and again, to be fair, we did approach the Minister for Health, and I think it's important, and you'll know this anyway, Mr. Gaston, of the support from Health through the Regional Trauma Network, which is very effective. But again, you know, if you're looking at it from the point of view of health economics, I think investment in this work would save millions for the health service. Payment for the bereaved, again, members will be aware, on the 11th, I think we raised this as an issue. We have evidence with the First and Deputy First Minister, and we are pursuing that. The last conversation we had, we were asked if we would update that evidence and then come back to the Executive and to the Committee to do that. And it's something, and again, you'll be aware when the members were listening to the groups on the 18th, again, it's an area there's consensus amongst all the group that something needs to be done to support the bereaved as part of the acknowledgement. I think it's another, to pick up the point about reconciliation, I think it's part of the jigsaw that hasn't been addressed so far.
Like within last year's budgets, I think the department said there was 85 million wasn't ring fenced, and in that 22 million, and I know this can change every year, had to be repurposed because it wasn't needed for victims payments and different things. But I fail to see that in a budget the size of TEO, how when you have 85 million non-earmarked, that they can't find 3 million from somewhere. As I said, politics is all about priorities. Surely, if you're serious about protecting and helping this sector, you need to be putting them near the top of the list. Joe, you mentioned about the Republic, the Irish government, and there's a responsibility in them. I've said in this committee many times where they were an active participant, and to date they've almost seemed to slip through the net, haven't taken any responsibility for how they facilitated the IRA during the Troubles, and haven't contributed their share for what they permitted to go on in Northern Ireland for years upon years upon years about creating a border for safe haven for terrorism. And I think more needs to be done to challenge the Irish government of what they allowed to take place in Northern Ireland and the ethnic cleansing along the border. I'm astounded that we're sitting here today and there's a shortfall in an evidence-based budget, and you're saying very clearly, we have groups up here protesting today, and you're saying very clearly that will lead to reduced services. I think it's shameful of the priorities that we're sitting in this position. Again,
without obviously commenting on the political dimension, I think for us and for victims and survivors, it's a very simple issue. If you're told that you're going to be going on a waiting list now for 6 to 9 months, or you're going to be placed back and the groups are trying to support you, can't support you, you're looking at the money that's been spent elsewhere, whether, you know, across the executive or particularly in this area. You look at legacy mechanisms, legacy bodies, you look at figures been, you know, thrown around of millions of pounds, and you say, well, I can't get on a waiting list. And again, maybe I'm very simplistic, but there's a need for some joined up thinking and joined up discussions if we're serious about investing in victims and survivors. It can't be, as we're having at the moment, the issue been bounced between Westminster and here and the Republic of Ireland, because what happens in that nobody takes responsibility or accountability.
I have to just move on with the others to come in. Carol, please.
So, welcome back to the committee. So Joe, you raised it, so I'm going to expand on it in terms of the ICRIR. 240 staff, 60 million spent, not one report. What's and victims and survivors being let down? What's your view? I mean, as Commissioner, what do you have to say about that publicly?
Again, I've read the report, and it is very disappointing and very damning. I would say two things. First of all, I, as Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, we weren't aware there was a review going on, which is incredibly disappointing. Nor were we aware of the amount of money that had been invested. Again, equally disappointing. So we've written to the Secretary of State asking for an explanation on that. And again, when you read the report, and again, it's very easy to, and I appreciate the staff in there, some of them doing incredibly difficult and challenging jobs, but the report, from my reading of it, focuses on governance and financial management and all the things you'd expect in it seems to me, a rapidly growing startup business from nothing to 270 staff and going through money at the rate of knots. However, that type of publicity, that type of report does nothing for the confidence of victims and survivors who might have considered saying, we will engage with this body, and now they're going to be asking why.
Just to let you know that we've agreed to write to the British Secretary of State and indeed Sir Declan Morgan about coming in front of the committee. I mean, I find it incredulous. The groups are asked, and rightly so, to provide proper governance and oversight. There's a gap of 3.3 million for now, and 60 million has went. And so my ask is, have you made arrangements to meet with the British government and the British Secretary of State over this?
But I say we, again...
I appreciate it's early days.
Oh no, but
will you meet them?
Oh no, we will, because I think it's an issue in the same way as I say our concern is victims and survivors at the heart of this, and they're looking at that and they're reading the news and thinking, what's going on? You know, and that at a very simple personal level, that's very hard to explain. And you know, I do appreciate anybody here has been involved in any sort of governance and review. You know, it seems to me there's so many things going on there in terms of the culture of the organisation and bringing people together. That must be very challenging. However, that's not the point. The point in victims and survivors don't feel that they're being looked after.
Well, there's 54 staff in the VSS, 140 staff across all the groups. There hasn't been a problem with any of them. And that's the point I'm making, Joe. When people are focused on what the outcome should be to individuals and their families.
Yes, yeah.
And I just think that I would appreciate, so you're doing that, appreciate the report came out yesterday. It's quite big.
Yes, yeah.
It's very intense, and it does deserve time to study it carefully. But what I would also like you to do is also go to the British government to ask for more money for us here. Because I have no doubt the First and Deputy First Minister will do their best. It is an executive strategy, but they have responsibility to try and plug that gap. But the fact is, the British government are funding this place well below need. And as Justice Michael Linden and Paul and Anthony said previously, that this is almost, these connections are so deep now between you all, and there's a prediction that the needs of victims and survivors are going to go into another generation, and that needs to be projected and costed. So, as Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, would you consider going to the British government and asking for more money?
I mean, obviously that's a responsibility of politicians and political leaders here, but certainly from the point of view of the Commission, we would have no difficulty at all in seeking that support. In the same way, we would have no difficulty in seeking support from the government in the Republic of Ireland, because our view is it's about investing in the sector. And again, I appreciate there's discussions at a much higher level and political discussions, but the reality is we can't be sitting saying to victims and survivors, we can't find the money to support your needs now, and they're reading in the press about millions of pounds been spent elsewhere. So, no, very happy to follow.
And Joe, that's why I'm asking the questions,
yeah.
because they look to you as your advocate.
Yes.
Us as well,
yes,
but you're the Commissioner.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, see, in terms of yourself, I appreciate the DNA has been paused, because I felt that it was a retrograde step. I just felt it, particularly for people who are living with trauma. You know, you wake up one day and you mightn't feel like going to an appointment, and you mightn't even have the ability to cancel it. But also the sector itself is mainly women, professional women, who were actually going to lose out on money. So in terms of that relationship you have with your 5 community partners, how does that co-production, co-design go forward in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, the community partners, it's the 5 that you mentioned. There's obviously a much larger sector there as well, so there's probably another 10 or 12 organisations that deliver talking therapies, so
yes,
probably central to that discussion. And then there's the widest possible lens of the 35 organisations. One of the things we're really keen to do now that we've got over the point of allocating the funds that we have at the minute is to re-establish the Victims Practitioner Working Group, which brings staff and key staff from those organisations together to talk through exactly these kind of things. So co-design any changes, anything that needs to be brought forward. As I say, it's a difficult square to circle at the minute because there is such a variation of practice within the sector. Maybe that's just something that we have to accept is a variation. What we were trying to do, I suppose, was to avoid sort of displacement of therapists who might gravitate towards a particular group in a particular area, because that's maybe where the terms and conditions were slightly more generous. But look, we listen and we learn from what those on the ground have to say and have to tell us about this approach, and we'll absolutely take those views and try and find a way forward that we can all work with.
And in terms of the victims and survivors payment,
yes,
that's not going to impact on their benefits, sure it's not?
But now you're talking about the TPTPS scheme?
Yeah.
I think there's all the benefits disregards, as far as I'm aware, in place for that, and certainly with regard to the more modest payments that VSS make within our self-directed assistance scheme, that's also
disregarded as well.
Doesn't come in for benefits at all.
And apart from the 3.3 million, what would they ask? I mean, this is the strategy. I mean, that does need funded. What other asks are there?
So one of the key things, I suppose, for the strategy, because that is into the slightly longer term, the most important thing on the horizon there, Joe's already mentioned, is what happens after the Peace Plus programme. So we have, in addition to our funding from the Executive Office, we have a €25 million Peace programme, which runs for about 4.5 years. That runs out for us in late 2028, and that funds 25 advocacy staff and about 30 health and wellbeing caseworkers, and that is really the glue that holds a lot of this together. It connects people with services. It's crucial to the function of the regional trauma network. It also funds the research that we've already mentioned. It funds resilience activity, which is getting started now, which is great to see, and it funds significant trauma education as well. So it's a huge gap to fill, and it's quite a large amount of money to find. If
Much is it?
So it's €25 million over 4.5 years. So it's about 5 million a year, 4 to 5 million per year. When we're looking at a budget for the sector as a whole through our victim support programme of 8 million a year, another 4 is a significant element. We are hopeful, and I understand that there is provision that there can be a future peace programme. This is what happened last time as well, and you do end up with a gap between two programmes. So Peace Plus will end in probably around the end of 2028. It's likely to be a little bit of time before a new peace programme will be operational, and we have the support of the Executive Office last time to take us through that gap, and that's the conversation already starting, I think, to say whether it be another peace programme that comes after or some other form of programme to replace it, there needs to be support in the gap in between, and that's right at the centre of that sort of 10-year period of that. There's all sorts of other things in there. I've mentioned the bereaved, I've mentioned education, memorialisation. Many of those things will come with a cost, which is probably outside of our, I guess, our remit and our budget. But that's what is being discussed collaboratively between ourselves, the Executive Office, and the Commission, and we meet quite regularly to work our way through that strategy. But you're quite right. The budget is going to be crucial to it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Philip, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with previous contributors, firstly by welcoming you, but also, politics is about choice, and it's now continue to join with others in ensuring that we do get a fair funding model. But it would be remiss of us not to recognise the fact also that this committee has made a choice in other bills and put forward amendments that will cost £37 million, where this is £4 million, which I think would be much more impactful than the decision that this committee has already made. So we're responsible for some of the decisions that we make and the budgets that are allocated to, so it can't just be abdicated on to others. I just want to get into the detail in relation to the organisations then, some of whom have joined today. So 39 that were previously funded applied again, is that correct?
So let me just run down that sort of chronology. So we had 45 organisations in the previous programme, which ran up until the end of March 26. 6 of those chose not to apply this time.
39 applied.
So that brought down, but 5 new applicants came in. That brought it back up to the 44 applications that we got. One of those applications was deemed ineligible at the first stage, so that was sort of a pass-fail of do you have the required background of supporting victims and survivors. So that was one of the new organisations that came forward that didn't pass the first hurdle. 5 of the organisations, which was a combination of some of the new applicants and some of the existing organisations, didn't reach the required minimum score threshold to be funded, to receive any allocation.
And which of the current ones were that?
So there was 3 of the current organisations: County Armagh Phoenix Group, South and East Tyrone Voluntary Welfare, and South Tyrone Voluntary Welfare.
Okay.
So three organisations. That brings us back down to 38, of which 3 aren't a part of the central victim support programme. Yeah. It's not that they're small groups, but it is that they are peace partners.
Okay, so
the only requirement they have is for a little bit of overhead support to help them remain within the peace programme, not to deliver activity within VSP. So that's how we get from 45 organisations previously to 38/35 going forward.
And you fund the 5 support groups for the pension applications?
So there's no overlap there. Those 5 groups are also within VSP, but it is a separate allocation from the TPDPS pot to fund the staff to deliver those application supports.
Are you aware of any of those organisations that you fund that are currently being investigated by the Charity Commission?
I know there was one organisation where there was an engagement with the Charity Commission, which I understand has concluded with a letter back to the organisation. Yep.
What did that letter say?
I haven't got it in front of me. I could come back to you on the detail of it. But I think it was some self-review points, if I remember correct, and some recommendations.
And then I just wanted to check, Joe, you said you met with the Deputy First Minister and the Junior Minister, did you? Or?
Yes, the meeting was with the First and Deputy First Minister, and then unfortunately the First Minister couldn't attend. She had to go to another meeting, and then the Junior Minister, I think at very short notice, took her place, which was great.
Mm-hmm. And that was on the
28th of April.
And have you had any engagement or follow-up from the First Minister since then? Obviously, she was unable to attend that meeting.
No, we've been engaging with the officials to, and again, I'm not a civil servant, but
of course.
Their language is around being minded to find a solution.
Yeah. And then when you were here at the last time, sir, I just raised the issue in relation, I know this was developed by the previous Commissioner, but this was the payment for the bereaved. And I had the recommendation within that was that that would be paid for by the Northern Ireland Executive. I had raised with you at that stage in relation to had you sought contributions from the Republic of Ireland. Having read back the Hansard, you gave a very good politician's answer.
Thank you very much. I regret saying that.
But I just wanted to check, have you now that the First and Deputy First Minister have asked you for an updated report / request on that, has that been updated to include contributions from UK government and Irish government?
Thank you, and I'm glad you raised that, Mr. Bright, because I think it will and it should.
And when will that process be finished?
Well, we're starting to look at that at the moment, and then we're also have, I think from memory, Tina will keep me right, we have a meeting set up with the Taoiseach's office?
The Taoiseach's
office in June, and again, following up the Chair's question, we'll also be raising that in our meeting with the Secretary of State as well.
Okay. Thank you.
So we're very keen to pursue the payment for bereaved. Mm-hmm.
You, Philip?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, thank you. That's everybody who's indicated they'd like to ask questions, so really appreciate your time. We will discuss some follow-up actions now, but just for now, thank you so much. Okay, so Clark, can we maybe recap on any...
Sorry about the heat. Very warm, isn't it?
Just give it a minute then, we'll just get people...
Take my jacket off, I don't know if you're allowed to.
Where's your daughters? Apparently if the chair has theirs off, you're allowed to.
I'm sorry, thanks.
I learned this last week.
All right, okay. Paid attention.
No, don't worry at all. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, so we
have to get out, sorry.
That's okay, no rush. We're just going to recap on any actions, please.
So, Chair, does the committee wish to write to the VSS just to follow up on the Charity Commission point that Mr. Brett made? And also, have we got this correct? So keep me right, members, are we writing to the Commissioner urging him to approach the NIO for further support?
Yes.
Great.
Did he not give a commitment he would do that anyway?
He did.
He
but
did.
but
Yeah,
it just
and the
keeps
British
the-
government.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's agreed then, members?
Okay, were there any other actions?
Can I just ask, you said those people were up for protest. Who were they protesting to?
They were up to make a point and, what would you say, to show their concerns. They were speaking to the media and they were out in front of the building before committee.
Oh, so they were up with you, Timothy?
They were up and then the committee listened to the committee.
And were they protesting about the executive?
Shortfall.
The shortfall, right, okay.
Raising concerns, maybe protest wasn't the right word, but they're raising concerns.
Yeah, 100%.
That they have, and I think it was quite clear today that without even them being here, there's quite a recognition of the problems the shortfall will cause. One of the things I was going to ask, Chair, obviously 3.3 million. If the services aren't fully funded to the evidence base, I have a fear that will cost a lot more to the Department of Health.
Of course it will.
Is there any merit in writing to the Department of Health to, is there anybody that can...
I suppose we could write under the guise of the Regional Trauma Network to see about the funding that's allocated to it, whether they're going to enhance it and expand it. I suppose that would be...
Good idea, Chair.
Yeah, even onto the strategy for victims and survivors, the 10-year strategy.
Just got it open here in front of me as well,
Yeah.
Forgive me, we're writing to the Department of Health?
Yes, please.
Fab, that's brilliant, thank you.
Okay, anything else, members?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. There was mention of research.
Yes.
It's not that I'm getting fixated. I keep hearing people talking about research that you never see.
Yep.
So
Fair point.
I do think it would be important, because it's probably ongoing, but it'll actually help the argument to get additional funding out there.
Yep.
And I would appreciate if we could go to VSS, the Victims Payment Board, and indeed the Commissioner. The Commissioner's only starting, but still, I just think it would help make the argument, and it would be helpful to see it.
Yeah, I think. Thank you, Carol. I think that they certainly have some research that shows sort of the prevalence in Northern Ireland, but I'm not sure how complete it is. And I think in some ways the Commissioner was then saying that there would be needed for an augmented piece of research. But I do take your
Augmented
suggestion.
from what? But
exactly. So if we have a look, if we write and ask them what information they have in terms of prevalence, and then we could maybe then ourselves look at raise, or we may say that this is something that the Executive Office themselves might want to look at.
and then Chair, also the Government Actuaries Department as well. They do a lot of modelling and forecasting. Based on what? How did they inform the Victims Payment Board? Because it's the sort of detail, I'm not saying we're all nerds, but some of us are. We're okay, but the issue is, I just think having that detail will help us all to help the people who are relying on this funding.
Okay.
It was the GAD report on the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme.
They done the modelling.
I saw it, when I was the part of the Finance Committee. I've seen this, so this is around. So okay.
Yeah.
But I do think as well that the Commission has also got some information in terms of prevalence that they spoke to up before, so maybe just...
I don't know if they've got their own or it's come back to God. It wasn't clear to me.
Yes.
Chair, I think Carl makes a fair point just about not just this, and research is important, but lots of organisations come here and they tell us that there's research, and they throw that out to us to suggest that that's the resource from which they then make their arguments. But you're right, we don't often see that research, and I think it is important that if you're making those arguments, you then have to verify it from the source that it's coming from.
Through the Chair, all joking aside, I see RIR 60 million, not one report, right? These people here have actually probably got the best research. They're getting the research from people who are directly impacted, and that needs supported. And when you put that into the context of they're fighting for 3.5 million now. And then there's 60 million, you know, no questions, that, you know, kind of shrugging shoulders here. It was bad culture. It's not good enough. But I do think we are shy of having a repository of reliable research. So,
well, I suppose then, just to net this item off, I wonder then, should we write to the Executive Office to ask for an understanding of how they allocate the funding? You know, what forms the business case in terms of allocating the funding? Is that okay? Are we agreed on all those actions?
Agreed,
Thank you. Okay, members, we're going to move on to item 8, so the retention and disposal schedule. So just to remind, at last week's meeting, the committee agreed to request a written briefing to outline the changes to the schedule since the last version in 2016 and the rationale for the timeframes and suggested actions for specific items. So just to advise that the response is currently with the Department for Communities, Minister for Clearance, and I'm just going to seek your agreement to defer this item to next week's meeting. Do we agree?
Could I make one point in that? So I noticed in the correspondence it talks about North-South Ministerial Council, and I would like a bit more clarity on what actually that means for TEO. When I submit an FOI or try to ask any type of questions to any North-South array, they seem to be exempt from responding to FOIs. So I don't understand.
Just a notice?
Yeah, I don't understand what we would be getting involved in or what powers we would have. Couldn't do yourself.
Okay, so it's, we're talking about the retention disposal schedule. There's a reference in it, you're saying, to North-South Ministerial Council, is there?
So this has come to the TO committee, and I suppose that's a bit of a hobby horse. It's a case of, well, when they don't respond to FOIs and they see themselves as exempt, what information are they asking to retain?
Okay.
And what that looks like, and who are they accountable to? Why is it coming to TEO? And what powers do we have, essentially, if they won't release information under FOI?
Okay, so I think in terms of FOI, we're going to get some advice. We're going to hear from Legal Services on another matter shortly, but I've written to them about FOI stuff. Dare I say it, when you get Mr. McMillan in here in closed session, obviously you should stick to the thing that he's there for, but I would be astonished if members didn't take the opportunity. So, but okay, that's the retention disposal schedule. I think it's a slightly different, so that's what they're keeping. The question is, what are they withholding? What are they not going to?
How do we see what they're keeping?
It says so in the retention disposal schedule. It says what they're keeping.
But how do we see?
Have
we any right to see what they're keeping?
Legal advice.
Okay, so can we move on? We might no, but I'm saying I think that the next item will, in closed session, we could possibly cover that once we get through the main business. Okay, members, Assembly, Legal Services, and I'm going to ask your permission to go into closed session.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, Sound.
Okay, members, we're back in public session. We've just received some legal advice from the Head of Legal Services Northern Ireland Assembly around our powers or the process under Section 44A of the Northern Ireland Act. So I think it was very clear, the advice we received. I'm very minded that we had our strategic planning session a couple of weeks ago. I think that we have now received all the information from the Irish Language Commissioner, and I think is it time to move on?
Yeah, just a couple of comments, but can I first of all welcome the fact that we've got the information. Disappointing that we had to waste a lot of committee time to get here, but I just wanted to check, is that letter and the legal fee breakdown, is that all that we had received? That's everything then? It's just, there was a post on the Commissioner's social media last week where he said that he was very disappointed that the Democratic Unionist Party decided to share on their social media the clip from last week, and what was said about him was inaccurate, and that he would be addressing the inaccuracies that I made in correspondence to the committee. Have we received any correspondence? No.
Received yet?
No. Okay. As soon as I get anything to go, I send it straight on.
This is like dun 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 to be continued.
I know. Okay.
I'm happy with that. Listen, we've got the information that we wanted to. I think it's clear why the Commissioner didn't want to provide it to us, in my opinion. You know, the response from the Belfast Telegraph is quite clear and robust, that the Belfast Telegraph has provided a truthful translation of the interview that Mr Deeds gave, and that they have not misrepresented him, and clearly there's been no legal action taken by the Commissioner.
Okay.
So it's clear what the facts are.
Okay, so and as I say, last week I think we agreed that if people wanted to take this individually as MLAs, that they wanted to keep pursuing that, that was up to them. But
seriously, I think this committee is getting used as a wash machine for things that's got nothing to do, honestly. And I just wish,
I think it's maybe time
no, I
to
think
move on.
If we can just, we've got the information, people have different views on it, but can we just focus on what we're here for?
I certainly take exception to the term used as a washing machine, because essentially Mr Deeds is accountable to this committee, and he was frustrating the process. When he came to this committee, he said on the 18th of March there was a bad translation. We read that he was misrepresented, and we read in one of the letters that he said to the Belfast Telegraph, sometimes less than faithful translation, where the dictionary that I've used for some of this stuff, which Mr Deeds should maybe frequent himself with, you know, when it comes to, he denied using the word poison, it's quite clear in here that that's exactly what he used. Like, Mr Deeds has taken this committee for a ride, essentially. He hid behind an FOI that a private member put in, namely myself, and on that basis he needs to be clear in future that when he comes to this committee, he needs to be open, honest, transparent, and when we ask for information, we shouldn't be held to the position that, oh no, we have to wait until there's an FOI takes place. Like in his letter to the Belfast Telegraph, he doesn't challenge at any point that there's a bad translation, and the Belfast Telegraph rightly rebuts a lot of the things that he does say, and it was clear.
Like Timothy, I think I've said I think we need to move on. I think there's opportunities in the chamber, there's opportunities through the media, through the newsletter or whatever outlet you want to use. I think that we as a committee, I think we've spent enough time on this issue.
He is accountable to us, and my final thing I would say on it, I do believe that Mr Deeds owes Mr Bryson an apology, and he also owes the Belfast Telegraph an apology. He came in and misrepresented them. He said it was a bad translation.
Okay, you got that on record.
It's quite clear from the information that he didn't dispute it was a bad translation at all.
Okay, thank you.
And he's been caught out in this issue.
You've made your point, Timothy. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to correspondence, members. I'm going to refer you to pages 180 to 184 of the pack for a summary of committee correspondence, and I just want to draw your attention to a number of items. So, first one's in relation to the Castlereagh Foundation, and I'm going to refer you to pages 185 to 186 of the pack. So the committee has received a response from the Executive Office to the committee's correspondence of the 9th of October last year regarding the Castlereagh Foundation. The Identity and Language Northern Ireland Act 2022 provides a further body, the Castlereagh Foundation, which can be established by either the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression or the Secretary of State. So I'm going to seek your agreement to write to the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression and to the Secretary of State to ask for an update on any preparatory work that has been undertaken regarding the establishment of this Castlereagh Foundation. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. So just to remind you that we did write to the NIO on the 1st of May to request an update on the grant-making functions of the office, and we await a reply on that. Okay, so moving on, 10.5 and 10.6, Committee for Economy Committee Stage Bills. So refer you to pages 197 to 200 of the meeting pack, and just to advise that the committee has received correspondence from the Economy Committee, who have begun the committee stage on 2 bills: the Utility Regulator, bracket Support and Decarbonisation Preparation Bill, and the Petroleum Exploration and Licensing Repeal Bill. So I'm going to seek your agreement to write to the Department on these bills. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. 9.7 TU Criminal Justice brackets Sentencing Bill. I'm going to refer you to pages 201 to 202 of the pack. Just to advise that the committee has received a response from the Executive Office to the committee's correspondence of the 24th of April 2026 in relation to the Criminal Justice brackets Sentencing Bill. The Department has advised that there will be no implication nor any role for TU arising from the bill. So we're going to seek your agreement to provide the Committee for Justice a nil response on the bill. Great, thanks.
Great.
Okay, so the 10.8, the Health Minister Central Repository System. So I'm going to refer you to pages 203 to 205 of your pack. Just to advise that the committee has received a response from the Health Minister to the committee's correspondence on the 24th of April 2026 in relation to the establishment of a central repository or depositories system. The Minister has advised that there are no plans for the establishment of such a system at this time, and just to advise that the committee previously agreed for RAISE to consider prevalence studies relating to victims and survivors of non-recent historical institutional child abuse in the UK and Republic of Ireland, and RAISE has advised that COSIGA is currently updating its 2023 advice paper, which will examine the existing evidence and models for assessing the prevalence of non-recent child sexual abuse. So just to agreement to note to consider the updated paper from COSIGA when published, and following that revisit we will request the research from RAISE. Okay, great. Okay, so 10.9, First Minister and Deputy First Minister update on race relations strategy and racial equality bills. So I'm going to refer you to pages 206 to 208 of your pack. So just to advise, the committee has received a response from the First Deputy First Minister to our correspondence. And just to advise that the draft framework for race relations and an initial 2-year delivery plan is now out for public consultation and will close on the 3rd of June this year. Ministers have advised that alongside the development of the draft framework, work is ongoing to reform the Race Relations Northern Ireland Order 1997, and during question time this week the Deputy First Minister outlined that and in quotations, the resulting policy proposals, which are substantial and in some cases complex, are under consideration. Okay. So I'll just finish this and then bring in. Thanks. So just to advise that the committee was due to receive an oral briefing from departmental officials at next week's business on race relations, and just to seek your agreement to postpone this oral briefing until there is a decision on the race relations legislation from ministers. Are we agreed on that?
No.
No. Okay. Go ahead.
Not because I think that response from the Deputy First Minister is not factually correct.
Okay.
My understanding is the First Minister signed off on this and the Deputy First Minister is still considering it, and this has been sitting on the table for a long time. So I'm not indulging that anymore, to be frank. I think we need a response on why she's holding it up.
Okay, no, I really appreciate that intervention, Carol. I think the frustration from my point of view, because it was actually my party colleague who asked the question for an update on this, is that we have a lot to get through in our committee sessions, and if all we're going to get are more departmental officials to come before us and sort of shrug a little bit and say, I'm sorry, we can't answer these.
There's no point.
There's no point, so that's why we're saying about deferring that oral briefing. And that's this. It's in that space. It's not in any way to undermine how frustrated I and others are that we haven't seen this the draft of this bill.
So there's two things.
Okay,
We can't agree to defer the oral briefing because
Yes.
I don't think it is fair and officials.
Yes.
No.
But my understanding is, because I've asked questions on this as well,
Yeah.
that it's just sitting there. It's in the ether. First Minister's cleared it, and it's sitting with the Deputy First Minister for clearance. So we should write and ask, is that the case?
Okay, so I'm happy to do that. I'll put it to the committee. I suppose the other aspect of it is at the business committee we wrote to FMD. FMD asked for an update on all the legislative programme for the remainder of this year, remainder of the mandate. And at the end, they said at the end of June we should be getting it. So I think that officially the executive officer is still intending it to come before us before summer recess, but we haven't seen any evidence of that. So I'm going to put that proposal to the committee then, and that's to write and find out the exact status
Yes, please.
of it, and if there's any particular reasons why it hasn't been signed off. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, so just to move on then, 10.10 birth mothers and their children for justice NI. So this is in relation to correspondence we've talked about before. I'm going to refer you to pages 209 to 210 of your pack. So just to advise that we have received correspondence from birth mothers and their children for justice regarding a meeting between themselves and Timothy. The group would like to clarify that they do not wish to be prioritised first in terms of the inquiry that should follow the Mother and Baby Institutions, Bank Laundries and Workhouses and Redress Scheme. And I think I spoke to them myself just in general terms, and I think it was more that they want to ensure that birth mothers in general are the ones that are brought forward in the inquiry, as opposed to a hierarchy of individual constituent groups.
Yeah, indeed. I think where the translation has been lost potentially is commentary around that. It wasn't the letter, and they just wanted to be very clear that it's not birth mothers for justice want to be first. They are lobbying that birth mothers set the foundation, and that's something I think members of this committee, everybody will make up their own mind, should make reference to, if agreeable, come to the chamber comments in a couple of weeks' time for something like that to be built in to the terms of reference that they want to set the foundation right. Birth mothers should be coming to set the context for the inquiry.
Okay.
And I think that's fair enough.
Okay, so we're content to note this item? Okay, so
Great.
I'm going to ask the clerk to read other items and onto the record, please.
So members, there's four more. 10.3, the Youth Assembly for Northern Ireland. 10.4, we have the Children of Northern Ireland invitation to launch of new research report. 10.11, ARC as some documentation about the review of Assembly Committee engagement on cross-cutting executive strategies. And 10.12 is correspondence from the Finance Committee on the voter account. Can I ask Chairperson, is the committee content to note?
Yes. Thank you.
Lovely.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, members, item 9, draft forward work programme. I'm going to refer you to pages 5 to 7 of the table pack for the updated forward work programme. I'm going to ask the Assistant Clerk to talk through any changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as we agreed to defer the retention disposal schedule until we hear back from PRONI, that will be considered next week. And we'll also have an oral briefing from departmental officials on the response to Module 2 report of the COVID inquiry. And just to make members aware, the joint meeting with Justice that was due to take place on the 2nd of June has had to be postponed until Tuesday the 30th of June, just at the request of PSNI and the officials that they would like to attend that day. But I'll send an updated request to members to put that in the diary.
Okay, content? Okay, any other business, members?
No.
No. Okay, so date, time and place next meeting, next Wednesday the 20th of May, 2 p.m. in this room 30. The meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound.